Chapter 164. Haha, how come I have never heard of a chronic illness that prevents one from becoming an official? Seeing the young scholar put down his chopsticks and leave, the middle-aged man said with a smile. This person used such a clumsy excuse to brush off his majesty. How despicable. The old man's dark voice floated out. Attempting to deceive the emperor, what is the punishment? According to the law, he should be beheaded. The old man's voice paused and then he said, however, ignorance is not a crime. He did not know his majesty's identity, so he can be given a lighter sentence. Aha, Changda, you have a sharp tongue but a soft heart. Your bad habit hasn't changed in decades, the middle-aged man said with a smile. A hint of warmth appeared on the old man's cold face. He had watched his majesty grow up. From the time he was a toddler learning to speak to the time he became a little prince and was made crown prince by the late emperor. Then he personally watched him ascend to the throne. It had been decades. It was said that the emperor was heartless, but he knew very well that the current emperor valued relationships and was a rare wise ruler. The relationship between the two seemed to be master and servant, but it was better than that. Let's go. After a walk, my chest doesn't feel so tight anymore. Go and investigate that young man just now. He's so young but he doesn't want to serve the country and wants to be a hermit. However, although his personality still needs to be polished, he has potential, the middle-aged man said with a smile and walked outside with his hands behind his back. The old man followed closely behind. As the two of them left, countless silhouettes flickered in the surrounding darkness, disappearing in the blink of an eye. After strolling out of the garden, he was still slightly hungry. Li felt regret. If he had known that this high-ranking official would be the same as Professor Feng and make him an official in the end, he wouldn't have said so much just now. Otherwise he wouldn't have been so hungry. He only drank half a bowl of porridge and only ate a few mouthfuls. Was a pity? Shaking his head, he decided to go say goodbye to Li Xian and go back to sleep early. At this time, not far away around a wide pavilion, there was a lively scene of laughter and toasting. Most of the people gathered here were scholars. At this time of turbulence, thanks to Prince Ning's invitation, they gathered together to brainstorm and discuss the affairs of the country using the opportunity of the Wang Fei's birthday banquet. Perhaps they could really come up with a good solution. Other than the officials from Qing and Prefecture who had been invited, the new Jinshi who had graduated from Qing and Prefecture this year were all included. These people were the future pillars of the country. He didn't mention the matter of making him an official again and continued to walk forward. Where should I find Li Xian? Seeing this scene, County Magistrate Lu trembled and sat back in his seat again. As for greeting County Magistrate Li, he didn't even dare to think about it. He even treated the emperor so casually. How could he, County Magistrate Lu, be qualified? It was not easy to find Li Xian in such a large mansion, and it didn't seem good to leave without saying goodbye. When Li Yi was thinking of finding someone to bring him a message and go back to sleep, a figure came to him. It was a young woman. The woman was extremely beautiful. She wore a silk dress without any makeup. Her eyebrows were distant and her eyes were like autumn water. She was indeed a peerless beauty. Puff! Seeing this peerless beauty, Li Yi couldn't help laughing for a moment. What are you laughing at? A trace of blush appeared on the woman's face, and then she became angry and said, what are you laughing at? I'm not laughing. Li Yi looked serious, but the next moment he couldn't help laughing again. Ah, the way you dress, it's really, the anger on the woman's face deepened. She reached for her waist out of habit, only to realize that she had changed her attire today. She did not carry her saber either. She waved her fist at Li Yi and said, I dare you to laugh again. Although it was normal for a woman to dress like this, Li Yi was used to her wearing the police uniform. He didn't see her as a woman from the bottom of his heart. At this moment she stood in front of him in a different outfit and he was really not used to it. However, looking at her clenched fist, Li Yi knew that if he continued to laugh like this, something bad would happen. He hurriedly stopped laughing and said, I won't laugh. If you see Li Xian later, remember to tell him that I'm going back first. Goodbye, ha. Seeing that the situation was not good, Li Yi slipped away. Mingzu clenched her fist and looked at him with some shame and anger. Business was more important, so she didn't care and strode forward. Why can you sing other people's lyrics but not mine? Do you look down on me? When passing through the place where the scholars gathered, an angry voice came to his ears. Li Yi looked in that direction in surprise and shook his head. He still felt that it was more important to go home and sleep, so he didn't plan to join in the fun. When he was about to leave, he heard the next voice and paused. Chapter 165. Young master, you misunderstand. I have no such intentions. It is just that I am not feeling well today and my singing has been greatly affected. If I continue, I fear I will disturb the mood of all the young masters." The beautiful girl bowed and said apologetically, "What do you mean by not feeling well? Don't use this excuse to brush me off." A young man stood up from his seat and said impatiently, "How come I don't see anything wrong with you? If you are asked to sing, then sing. Today all the officials and your peers are present. If you don't sing, it will ruin everyone's mood." At this time he was annoyed that this performer did not know how to appreciate favors. It was because he had seen how good she was at singing that he had asked her to sing his best work. He hadn't thought that she would sing someone else's work so straightforwardly and readily. When it came to him, she made excuses. This was clearly making him lose face in front of all his peers and all the officials. The beautiful girl had a difficult expression. Today was Wang Fei's birthday banquet. All the famous performers and singers of the prefectural city had been invited to sing and dance. They could not refuse. Even though she was on her period, had a cold, and was not feeling well, she didn't dare to disobey. But at this time the feeling of discomfort was getting worse. Her head was dizzy and she couldn't sing no matter how good she was. It was not suitable for her to speak. But she knew that none of the people present tonight could be offended by a small performer like her. Gritting her teeth, she prepared to nod and agree when a laughing voice came from the side. A singer walked over and said with a smile, "Master Chui, you don't know, but Ruoqing is not feeling well today. If Master Chui doesn't mind, how about I sing this song?" There was gratitude in Wan Ruoqing's eyes as she looked at the singer. She was also skilled in singing and had some fame in Qing'an. The two of them did not have a close relationship. She had not thought that she would come forward to help her out at a time like this. "Who do you think you are?" The Chui man glanced at her coldly and turned to look at Wan Ruoqing. In a cold voice he said, "You really won't sing?" The woman trembled under his glare. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything in the end. She was only a lowly songstress, while the other was an outstanding talent among the scholars of Qing'an. Naturally, she did not dare to say anything more. After casting an apologetic look at Wan Ruoqing, he quietly retreated. They were already used to such a scene. The singers and actors had expressions of grief and indignation on their faces, but they could only lower their heads in silence. "You really don't want to sing?" When the man from the Chui clan said this, he raised his voice slightly. Many people in the surroundings stopped talking and looked over in puzzlement. What happened to Brother Yen Xian? Strange, why is Brother Yen Xian making things difficult for a performer? He drank quite a bit just now. I'm afraid he's a little drunk now. There were also some people who were closer and knew the whole story. They gave a simple explanation. Everyone guessed that Chui Yinxin was really drunk tonight for making things difficult for an actor for no reason. Speaking of which, the wine in the manor was really good. Scholars couldn't live without wine. All of them had amazing alcohol tolerance, but they didn't dare to drink too much tonight because the wine was too strong. Normally they would raise their cups and drink to their heart's content, but tonight they were worried that they would get drunk and cause trouble. Everyone looked at the two of them with an expression of interest, but no one went up to mediate. A mere performer, a lowly girl, if she was in trouble, then she was in trouble. No one would take it to heart. "Brother Yen Xin, I'm afraid it's not appropriate to make things difficult for a weak girl like this." Wan Ruoqing was about to grit her teeth and agree when a luxuriously dressed young man walked out of the crowd and walked over. "Brother Xian, what is the meaning of this?" Chui Yinxin looked at the young man coming over and asked with a frown. He and Jianghu were both scholars of Qing'an who had passed the exams this year. In the past they hadn't interacted much. Tonight they had spoken a few words. Presumably he wasn't someone who liked to meddle in other people's business. Why was he standing up for this performer? The young man smiled and said, "Brother Yen Xin, don't be angry. Miss Ruoqing is an old friend of Xian's." Chui Yinxin was stunned for a moment. After the two of them looked at each other, Chui Yinxin looked at him strangely and said with a smile, "I really didn't expect Brother Xian to be such a sentimental person. To tell you the truth, Brother Yen Xin, I've admired Miss Ruoqing for a long time. This time, when I return home after graduating, I want to help her get rid of her lowly status and take her back." The young man smiled and cupped his hands at Chui Yinxin. "If that's the case, I naturally won't make things difficult for her." Chui Yinxin nodded. Since the other had already spoken, he naturally wouldn't insist. He turned his head to look at the performer and said, "Tonight, there are many lords and people of the same age present. Since Brother Xian is interested, why don't you agree? It can be considered as a witness." He saw Jiang Ziyan's intentions. At this time he intended to speak up to help him. Yen Xian's words make sense. Haha, if Brother Xian stands up for a woman, it will be a story to be told. Yes, yes. Tonight there are so many witnesses. He won't be allowed to go back on his words in the future. Just agree. In an instant, countless scholars stood up and said. They were all xianxia and naturally couldn't legally marry a lowly woman, but they could still take her as a concubine. In reality, such things were not uncommon among them. The officials who were a little further away had long become accustomed to this. Even the favored concubines of their families used to be famous performers in Qing and prefecture or prostitutes who had been in the limelight for a while. This kind of atmosphere was quite prevalent among the literati. At this time, the resentment on the faces of the other singers and performers had long disappeared. They looked at Wan Ruoqing with eyes full of envy. For these lowly women, compared to aging and dying alone, this was probably the best ending in this life. That young man had become a xianxia at a young age and had a promising future. Even if she became his concubine, it would not be a disgrace. Instead, it would be a great blessing. Jiang Zian looked at the beautiful woman with a smile and said softly, Ruoqing, what do you think? Hearing this, Ruoqing looked up at him with a smile on her face. She said, Master Jiang, Ruoqing appreciates your kindness, but I'm sorry. The feeling of discomfort was getting stronger and stronger. She resisted the dizziness and picked up a piece of rice paper with Cui Yanxin's new lyrics written on it. After bowing slightly to Jiang Zian, she walked toward the pavilion without looking back. Seeing this, everyone was slightly stunned. She would rather choose to sing than be Jiang Zian's concubine? When the singers and performers saw this, some regret appeared on their faces. If it had been them, they would have agreed without hesitation. The smile on Jiang Zian's face froze. After a while, he smiled again and said, Haha, it seems that it was Xian's wishful thinking. Being rejected in front of so many people had already caused him to lose a lot of face. However, even though he was extremely furious in his heart, he did not reveal the slightest bit of displeasure. Otherwise, it would only make others think that he was too narrow-minded. Cui Yanxin was a little surprised by this, but he did not care too much. After all, Jiang Zian's matter had nothing to do with him. Since the performer went up to sing, his original purpose had been achieved. After a short surprise, everyone stopped thinking about this matter and turned to discuss Cui Yanxin's lyrics just now. I just saw xianxia's lyrics. It is a rare piece of work. When the performer sings, Brother xianxia will be in the limelight again. Haha, with the world in your heart, you can't eat and sleep well. You are worried about the country and the people. Brother xianxia is really a role model for us. Hearing this, Cui Yanxin's face showed a little pride. Tonight he was in a good state of mind, so he wrote such a poem. He wanted to leave a good impression in front of everyone. The performer's singing was good, and he was afraid that he would add a lot of color to the lyrics. Before Wan Ruoqing reached the pavilion, the feeling of dizziness became more and more intense. When she stepped on the steps, she accidentally stepped on air, staggered, and almost fell. Right at this moment, a pair of strong hands supported her shoulders. She was startled and quickly pulled away. When she turned her head and saw a familiar face, her heart finally calmed down. Are you okay? The young man looked at her with some worry. I'm fine. Wan Ruoqing resisted the discomfort and gently shook her head. The young man looked at her pale face and remembered what he had just seen outside. He frowned and took the rice paper from her hand. After glancing at it, he crumpled it into a ball and threw it on the ground. What the hell is this? A faint, disdainful voice was clearly heard by everyone present. Chapter 166. She had worn the uniform of a bailiff for a long time and then changed into a woman's dress. It wasn't just Li Yi who found it strange, even Emingzu herself wasn't used to it. However, it was clearly inappropriate to wear the uniform of a bailiff at an occasion like tonight. She wore the awkward clothes and brushed past Li Yi. She walked to the end of the road and then turned back from the other side. She was clearly familiar with Ning Wangfu. She turned back and walked for a while before going up to an exquisite little building. The little building had 2 floors. Walking up the stairs, the middle-aged man who had just chatted with Li Yi sat down in a room by the window on the 2nd floor. The eunuch called Changde stood silently behind him. Imperial brother. Your Majesty. On the other side, Ning Wang and Ning Wangfei respectfully bowed to him. There are no outsiders here, there is no need for such formalities in private. The current emperor, the man called Li Hong, chuckled as he sat down. At this moment he was in a good mood. Just now, when the young man did not know his identity and casually chatted with him for a while, he felt that no etiquette or flattery could compare to hearing the fart from the young man. As the two sat down, a voice came from the door. Princess, His Majesty and Yang are waiting for you inside. Mingzu, come in. The female walked into the room. The empress was the first to stand and wave at her. Fuang Moho. Mingzu walked over and first bowed to the two. Then she said to Ning Wang and Ning Wang Fei, Mingzu greets Wang Shu Yinyang. Come and sit. Ning Wang Fei stood and held her hand, letting him sit between her and the empress. She said with a smile, this child, you haven't come to the Wang Fu to visit Yinyang in these months. When you were young, you were the one who bothered Yinyang the most. I was afraid of causing trouble for Yinyang and Wang Shu, Mingzu said with a smile. What trouble? Are you afraid that the Wang Fu will mistreat you? Ning Wang Fei was still holding his hand, a hint of blame in her eyes. Why didn't you just stay in the palace? Why did you come here to be a bailiff? Since ancient times, when has a princess ever been a bailiff? Ning Wang Fei's words made her feel somewhat at a loss. Just at this time another person strode in. Li Xian didn't find Li Yi in the Wang Fu and could only return helplessly. A servant passed on Ning Wang's words, telling him to come to this little building, so he immediately rushed over. Suddenly seeing the familiar middle-aged man on the main seat, Li Xian was stunned for a moment, then immediately bowed again. Xianer greets Uncle Huang. Get up, come to Uncle Emperor. Jing Emperor waved his hand, and Li Xian had to sit down obediently. After he sat down, the Empress seemed to think of something. She turned to look at Mingzu with dissatisfaction and said, You child, who told you to secretly bring wine to father? Don't you know that your father has asthma and can't drink? And Changda, I told you to look at His Majesty and you just look at him like this? Don't think that I don't know that without you, the wine would not have reached His Majesty's hands. This old servant knows his mistake. The old man behind Jing Emperor heard this and immediately knelt down. Get up, Zhen is also at fault in this matter. Let's not mention it anymore. Jing Emperor waved his hand and suddenly sniffed. He asked in confusion, where is the fragrance coming from? Since he didn't want to mention this matter again, the Empress didn't say anything more. She followed his topic and said with a smile, Your Majesty doesn't know, this thing is called perfume. It was given to me by Xian just now. Perfume? Jing Emperor's face was slightly surprised. Before he could speak, a trace of doubt appeared on his face again. He turned to look out of the window. Just at that moment, the originally noisy atmosphere outside suddenly became quiet. Below the small building was a spacious area. It was the place where the officials discussed the affairs of the state tonight. Sitting on the upper floor, one could hear a few words. They were used to the noisy arguments. Now that it had suddenly become quiet, it naturally made one suspicious. The old eunuch named Changda had already walked to the window. When he looked down from the window, a trace of surprise appeared on his old face. It's him. After a while, Jing Emperor stood up from his seat and walked to the window. When he saw the young figure below, he couldn't help but smile. It's him. Seeing the expression on Jing Emperor's face, Prince Ning and Li Xian also walked over with some doubts. What the hell? The young man crumpled Cui Yanxin's poem into a ball and threw it on the ground like a piece of scrap paper. Coupled with the mocking and disdainful expression on his face, the scholars who were waiting for the performer to sing the poem were clearly stunned where they stood. Arrogant, too arrogant. The next moment, such a thought emerged in their minds. Cui Yanxin's face had already turned red. He strode over and looked coldly at the guy who came out of nowhere. He gritted his teeth and asked, What did you say? This person's action just now was obviously looking down on his proud work. This was an unbearable insult for a scholar who valued talent very much. If he let him go like this, today's matter would definitely become a stain on Cui Yanxin's life. It's him? Isn't this the person who was reprimanded by Professor Feng just now? Yanxin once had a grudge against him? Many people present had just seen the scene of Professor Feng's anger, and someone instantly recognized Li Yi. I say, don't take out such a clumsy work to show off. You still want him to sing it? It's not your fault that the poem is bad, but it's your fault that it tortures others' ears when you sing it. Li Yi had never had a good impression of this so-called scholar who looked gentle on the surface but was actually sanctimonious. It was the same with Shen Zhao, and it was the same with this man surnamed Cui. After studying for a few years, he thought that he was the most talented person in the world. He was condescending, putting on a high and mighty appearance, bullying a woman, and everyone else just watched coldly from the side. In the future, the Jing kingdom would be governed by such a person, so why would it not perish? Of course, the most important point was that the person he bullied was someone Li Yi knew, and he often missed the taste of the two osmanthus cakes she made. Arrogant. His proud work was said to be worthless, especially the sentence, It's not your fault that the poem is bad, but it's your fault that it tortures others' ears when you sing it. This sentence almost made Cui Yinxin spit out a mouthful of old blood. There was not a single curse word in the whole sentence, but when it was put together, Cui Yinxin had the urge to strangle the person in front of him. He shouted angrily, "Arrogant person, what good poem can you come up with? Take it out for everyone to see. Today all the officials are here. If you can't come up with a good poem and insult your peers for no reason, I will ask all the officials to report you in front of His Majesty." At this moment, Cui Yinxin was also angry and depressed. He did not know the person in front of him at all, and thought he was some new scholar. Being insulted like this with his personality, of course he would not let it go. He was extremely confident in his poem, and in a moment of impulse he said these words. In the distance, a few local officials of Qin and also walked over. Professor Feng was walking at the front, and before he had even stopped, he heard Cui Yinxin's words. When he raised his head to look at the person in front of him, he staggered and almost fell. Yinxin? Cui Yinxin was someone he thought highly of, and he had not let him down in this imperial examination. He had obtained the title of scholar, and he really did not want to see Cui Yinxin be humiliated again. These days he had been preparing for the imperial examination in the capital, and did not know anything about the recent events in Qing and prefecture. Naturally, he did not understand that competing in poetry with the young man in front of him was practically asking to be humiliated. "Master Feng, I have made up my mind. Today I will not tolerate this humiliation." Cui Yinxin waved his sleeve and said with a face full of determination. Chapter 167. It's not your fault that you wrote poorly, but it's your fault for tormenting people's ears when you sing it? Haha, you really didn't let me down. The original noise was gone, and the dialogue between Li Yi and Cui Yinxin was clearly heard. Li Xian couldn't help laughing. Among the people he knew, Li Yi was the first one who could scold people to such a high degree. There were a large number of palace masters around the small building. Perhaps one of the servants carrying the dishes was a powerful figure who was hiding his strength. Chief Chamberlain Changde had only mentioned a few words, and in a short time, someone had already reported what had happened, word for word. Haha, you really know how to be protective of the fairer sex. Jing Di smiled and then seemed to think of something. He looked at Li Xian and asked, "Little Xian also knows him?" Li Xian nodded and said, replying to Imperial Uncle, "His name is Li Yi and he is Little Xian's friend." Li? Hearing this name, Jing Di's face showed a trace of doubt. He always felt that he had heard of it somewhere. "Imperial Father, Li Yi is the person who wrote rules for disciples. You just conferred him the title of county lieutenant." Mingzhu explained prettily on the side. As the ruler of a country he was busy every day. Naturally, it was impossible for him to remember the name of a scholar. After she reminded him, he remembered that it seemed to be true. "Li? Is he the person who cured my sister's chronic illness?" At this time the empress on the side also asked. "Imperial Mother, it's him," Mingzhu said. Even Jing Di did not expect that the interesting young man he met in the garden of the prince's mansion had such a deep relationship with the royal family. He already had a copy of the poem written by Cui Yinxin. After looking at it, he shook his head and said, "It can be regarded as a good piece of work. I am afraid that it is difficult for that young man to write a better one." In his heart, he admired Li Yi very much, but he did not understand his poetry. He hoped that he would win, but he also knew that the possibility was not high. Haha, Imperial brother guessed wrong this time. At this moment, Prince Ning smiled and stepped forward, saying, "Tonight, even if Cui had chosen anyone here, he might not have lost. But he chose Li Yi, so he can only humiliate himself." Because of Li Xian, he had specially sent someone to investigate Li Yi. Since he could be called the #1 scholar in the Jing kingdom by Su Lao Shuezhing, how could his talent in poetry be comparable to anyone? At this time the empress also said, "The birthday poem he wrote for my sister was not bad. I think he has some talent." Hearing that the Rui Du and perfume were made by Li Yi, the two of them naturally wanted to see what kind of gift he presented today. Although they were slightly disappointed that he only gave a birthday poem, they had to admit that the poem and handwriting were excellent. Could it be that I've underestimated him? When Jing Di looked down in surprise, Mingzhu's eyes also stopped on Li Yi. Most of the time he was easy to get along with, but if he showed that kind of expression, it meant that someone was going to be unlucky. "You should go and participate." He was already an adult, but he was still as childish as a naughty child. When he couldn't bully others, he went to complain to an adult. However, Cui Yinxin's words obviously did not scare Li Yi. If he had the ability, he should go and participate. It would be best if he could make him lose his position as a county officer. In the future he would definitely put 2 incense sticks in his house to thank him. You should go and participate. When Cui Yinxin heard this he felt like he had punched cotton. He almost couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. He met a handsome man who didn't know any tricks. He couldn't use any of his methods. Li Ai. Wan Ruoqing's pale face showed panic. She hurriedly picked up the Shen paper that he had crumpled into a ball from the ground. I'm fine. I just want to sing another song. It's nothing. Li Yi standing out at this moment was equivalent to standing on the opposite side of all the officials. Moreover, there were so many officials here. If he offended them, his future career would really be ruined. Even though she was very grateful for Li Yi's bravery, she couldn't ruin his future for her own selfishness. After all, the road of an official career was really too important for a scholar. Li Yi once again crumpled the paper into a ball. After Wan Ruoqing saw his eyes, she didn't speak anymore. There was a trace of determination in her beautiful eyes. Among the officials of Qing and Prefecture present, there were only 3 people who knew Li Yi: County Magistrate Liu, Professor Feng, and Magistrate Dong. County Magistrate Liu had, of course, investigated his subordinates. The results also surprised him. Suppressing Xin Zhao, making Yang Yanzhou feel ashamed of his inferiority, and rising to the top among the scholars of Qing and Prefecture. Professor Feng and Magistrate Dong had a deeper understanding of Li Yi. In terms of essays and poems, there really weren't many people present who could beat him. To be able to write such essays and poems, his talent in other areas must not be low. If it weren't for the fact that he had no interest in an official career, these people would most likely be suppressed by his brilliance in this year's imperial examinations. Brother, since you don't like Brother Yan Xian's poems, I'm afraid you already have something better in mind. Why don't you take it out for us to see? Jianghu walked out from the crowd and said with a smile. When his gaze swept past Ruoqing, a haze flashed across his eyes. No wonder she didn't agree. So she already had a lover? If you have any good poems, quickly take them out. Don't always hide them. After another voice sounded, everyone's gazes turned in that direction. Li Yi saw that the official who had come to Rui workshop with Professor Feng last time had spoken up before anyone else. He was slightly surprised. However, he also knew that if he didn't bring out something good today, it would be difficult to get through this. Miss Ruoqing, I'll have to trouble you to grind the ink, Li Yi said to Wan Ruoqing with a smile. Wan Ruoqing nodded and didn't move. The middle-aged official who had just spoken waved his sleeves and said, No need, I'll grind the ink for you myself. Magistrate Dong actually couldn't stand to see a few men make things difficult for a woman, but he wanted to see what kind of masterpiece Li Yi could write. After all, it was fine if he didn't do anything. Once he did, it would shake the entire poetry world in Qing and Prefecture. Based on the current state of the poetry world, stirring things up like this often was beneficial. Li Yi watched as the minor official walked to the side and started to grind the ink. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. This minor official didn't have a high position, but he liked to be in the limelight. The other officials hadn't said anything yet, but he was very proactive. His future would probably be like this. As for the others, they were guessing the meaning behind Magistrate Dong's actions. For a moment they weren't sure. He dipped the brush in the ink and glanced at Cui Yinxin. With a wave of his hand, a line of words flowed out like floating clouds and flowing water. Ugly slave. After the poem was written, some of the officials couldn't help but cry out when they saw the elegant handwriting. Good writing. Disregarding the content of the poem, just these 3 words were enough to make them look at the young man in front of them in a different light. Magistrate Dong and Professor Feng had seen Li Yi's writing before, so they weren't too surprised. However, when they saw the words written on the uppercase, they glanced at each other and then looked at Cui Yinxin at the same time. The youth doesn't know the taste of worry. Love to go up to the next level and forcefully express worry for the sake of composing a new poem. Cui Yinxin's poem just now roughly meant, he had nothing to do and climbed a tall building alone. He worried about the country and the people, so much so that he couldn't eat or sleep peacefully. He grew thinner day by day. The whole poem could be summed up in one word: worry. Just now, he didn't think there was anything wrong with this poem. Thinking about it now, it seemed a bit pretentious and unwell. After all, he looked full of energy and his body was wide and fat. He didn't look like he was growing thinner day by day. However, this was actually a common failing of many scholars. Normally, they wouldn't pay attention to these things. If it was brought up, most people would probably be labeled as forcefully expressing worry for the sake of composing a new poem. But now that it was pointed out, naturally it couldn't be ignored. At this moment, Li Yi picked up his brush and finished writing the first and second part. The youth doesn't know the taste of worry. He loves to compose a new poem and forcefully expressing worry. Now that he knows the taste of worry, he wants to say it but doesn't. He wants to say it but doesn't. It's a cool autumn. Professor Feng raised his head and glanced at Li Yi. As a professor of the government school, how could he not see that this sorrow was not the sorrow of parting, but the sorrow of home and country? The layers of foreshadowing were tactful and subtle, but not revealing. It was already an excellent piece of writing. But the problem was, what was with the sorrow and anger revealed in the whole poem? How could he have such experience at such a young age? With his attainments in poetry, he definitely didn't write this poem to express his feelings, but to slap people in the face. Forcefully expressing worry for the sake of composing a new poem. Xianxia had just finished worrying and he wrote such a sentence. Professor Feng sighed. He hoped that after tonight Xianxia wouldn't be traumatized. At this moment, the expressions of the surrounding scholars also changed. They still had the ability to judge. This poem was indeed much better than Xianxia's poem. Of course, the first sentence was more important. The youth doesn't know the taste of worry. He loves to compose a new poem and forcefully express his worry. Wasn't the word young man referring to Xianxia? Even they felt like they had been shot in the knees. Life had just begun. There were many things that had not been experienced. How could he have so many worries? Thinking of the poem he had written before, he couldn't help but feel a burning sensation on his face. At this moment, Xianxia's face was pale as he stared blankly at the paper. It was as if a sharp knife had pierced his heart. 2 streams of hot tears rolled down from his eyes. He raised his head to look at Li Yi. The sorrow and anger in his heart had reached the sky. Forcefully expressing worry for the sake of composing a new poem. Do you dare to be more ruthless? Xianxia's vision darkened and he fainted on the spot. Chapter 168. In ancient times, there was a person who loved poetry as much as his life. When he was defeated in a poetry contest, he could not calm down and vomited 3 liters of blood. Today there was Xianxia who was slapped in the face and fainted because of the phrase, writing a new poem to express sorrow. Although Xianxia was not as good as the poet, if what happened tonight was spread out, he would become a laughing stock for many people. Many years later, perhaps the xuanhuan and tanhua of the same year, or even the emperor, would be forgotten by the later generations. The name of Xianxia would be known by everyone when the story of writing a new poem to express sorrow was mentioned. Xianxia had just fainted due to a sudden surge of hot blood. There was no need to call for a doctor. Everyone helped him to a chair at the side, pinched his philtrum and slapped him. After a few breaths he slowly woke up. His face was still very red. No one knew whether it was because of anger or because of the slap. He pretended to be weak and did not dare to come closer. The damage of that poem to him was even more serious than dozens of floggings. From now on, Xianxia would never be able to get rid of the hat of writing a new poem to express sorrow. At this time, the scholars and officials in the field immediately changed the way they looked at the young man. Unofficial history once said that in the Shu Han dynasty, Zhuge Kongming used his glib tongue to make Wang Longli speechless. Wang Longli was so ashamed that he fell off his horse and died. They thought it was just an exaggeration in the unofficial history. Seeing the situation today, they unconsciously believed it. Wan Ruoqing clenched the corner of her clothes tightly. She knew that Li Yi was good at poetry, but these people were also outstanding scholars and new scholars. They were far from those who claimed to be gifted scholars. However, when she saw that the young man fainted after Li Yi wrote a poem, she forgot the discomfort in her body. Her cherry lips slightly opened, but she could not say anything. The next moment, the surprise in her heart turned into nervousness and worry. Oh no, oh no. Li made that man faint in front of so many Jinshuren officials. They won't let this go easily. If they are displeased then, she blamed herself. If she hadn't refused Xianxia's request, this wouldn't have happened. While she was feeling extremely remorseful, Jiang Zian walked over with a gloomy face. Xianxia and Your Excellency are both grand scholars of the same year. Don't you think Your Excellency's actions are a bit too much? 2 scholars who did not know each other would address each other as brother when they met. The word, sir, on the other hand, carried a sense of alienation. The surrounding Jinshu also agreed, and almost all of them stood against Li Yi. Although he was targeting Xianxia, he had scolded almost everyone present. It was a bit too much, and everyone was naturally dissatisfied with him. The officials present didn't care much about it. The officials present didn't care too much about this. They had been in the officialdom for many years and had experienced many things. It was common for scholars to be jealous of a woman. They asked themselves honestly, If that woman was also someone they liked and was scolded by Cui Yinxin like this, they would also do something indignant. Of course, Magistrate Dong's actions just now also made these old foxes not speak easily. Sorry sir, you guessed wrong. I am not a new Jinshi. Li looked at him and said calmly. I. Jiang Zian's expression froze, and the people around him were also shocked. Did he just say I? That was to say, the person in front of them had become an official before them. This year, the imperial court hadn't appointed a new Jinshi, which meant he wasn't in the same year as them. Although they would walk this path sooner or later, it wasn't now. Everyone looked at Cui Yinxin. This was embarrassing. This time it was likely that the lords would not stand on their side. Wan Ruoqing looked at Li Yi, surprised and suspicious. When did he become an official? Was he lying to these people? It would be fine if it was on other occasions, but there were many officials here today and he couldn't fool them. County Magistrate Li, you are indeed worthy of your reputation as the first scholar. But what is this I don't want to say, but it's a cool autumn day mean? Magistrate Dong looked at him and said with a smile, I'm curious. County Magistrate Li, why don't you say what you are worried about? You don't have to worry about offending anyone. The scholars of the Jing Kingdom won't be convicted based on their words. As soon as Magistrate Dong said this, everyone quieted down. His words revealed a lot of information. County Magistrate Li, the first scholar. And then there was the melancholy revealed in this poem. What was the melancholy? Magistrate Dong's words let go of Cui Yinxin's matter, and no one paid attention to Jiang Zian, who had just stood up. The new Jinshi wondered what was going on with this first scholar. Magistrate Dong seemed to be very familiar with him, and they wondered if what they did just now made Magistrate Dong unhappy. Magistrate Lu and some lower-ranked officials were probably thinking the same thing, but Professor Feng and the people around Magistrate Dong knew that Magistrate Dong's words weren't that simple. When they thought about the poem just now, they suddenly understood. Worried about the country, unable to say it, was he afraid of something? Could it be that he was using this to express his dissatisfaction with the peace faction that controlled the court's politics? At this time, the way Professor Feng looked at Li Yi changed for the first time. Using the past to contrast the present, using something to describe nothing and using nothing to describe something, he highlighted the word worry, and used this as a clue to spread out layer by layer. The feelings were sincere and tactful, and the words were shallow but the meaning was deep. If it was a loyal official who was being pushed aside and had no way to serve the country, it was understandable that he would be worried. But he clearly had no desire to become an official, and he didn't want to be one, so why would he be worried? Reading carefully, what was revealed between the lines was that he saw the country's affairs deteriorating day by day, and he was powerless to do anything about it. He was not willing to become an official because he didn't want to be used by the peace faction, and the stubborn disease of not being an official was probably an excuse because of this. No wonder Magistrate Dong looked at him differently. If this was really the case, then his worries were all in Magistrate Dong's heart. It turned out that he had been wrong about him all along. A trace of red appeared on Professor Feng's face. This kind of feelings, he was far inferior to him. At this time, Li Yi was still depressed in his heart. Where did this small official come from, and why did he have so many problems? He didn't even know what he was worried about. There was only one purpose for taking out this poem, and that was to slap the face of the shameless Jinshi who even bullied girls. How could he think so much? Even Professor Feng didn't say anything. Why did an official keep interrupting? Didn't he see that Professor Feng's face was red with anger? County Magistrate Li, Magistrate Dong is asking you a question. Although County Magistrate Lu was very afraid of Li Yi's background, it wasn't good to keep Magistrate Dong there. Seeing this, he spoke in a low voice to remind him. What, Magistrate Dong? Li Yi was stunned. A small official suddenly became a magistrate. This change was too sudden and he couldn't react for a while. Chapter 169. I know that those who offend him will not have a good ending. Above the small building, Li Xian did not care that the emperor and empress were here and laughed without grace. It was the first time he had seen someone faint from anger with just one poem. At this moment he couldn't help but think of the mid-autumn poetry meet. In Mianxiu Garden, the so-called second scholar of Qin and Fu had provoked him. When Li Yi finished his poem, all those so-called scholars had stopped talking. It was a pity that he had not been there. Otherwise he would have felt it more deeply. He made up his mind that in the future he would ask for a few poems from Li Yi. When the time was right he would throw them out like this and shock everyone. That feeling would be extremely satisfying. Little Xian, don't be rude. The emperor and empress were still here. Seeing that he did not have the bearing of a prince, Ningguang couldn't help but reprimand him. Wanting to speak but not wanting to speak, the sky is cold in autumn. Interesting. Changde sent someone to summon him. He didn't expect that the young man he met by chance in the garden would have so many entanglements with the royal family. Emperor Jing also admired him very much. He wanted to see what kind of expression he would have when he knew his true identity. After saying this, he suddenly furrowed his brows imperceptibly. The heavy feeling in his chest appeared again and his breathing became difficult. However, he experienced this kind of situation almost every few days, so he did not pay it too much attention right now. Downstairs, Li Yi had just learned from County Magistrate Lu that the curious little official just now was the Qin and Prefectural Magistrate. After a moment of shock, he composed himself and bowed. Sir Prefectural Magistrate, I have nothing to worry about. I was just casually lamenting. Casually lamenting? Hearing this, Cui Yinxin felt his blood boil again. Even when Magistrate Dong heard this, the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. Last time he didn't reveal his identity, so he casually brushed him off. But this time, in front of all the officials, did he dare to be more serious? Just as Magistrate Dong was about to speak again, a servant from the manor came over and said, Li, His Highness invites you. The Wang Yi that the servants of the Wang Fu mentioned was naturally Ning Wang. When the officials heard this, they were all stunned. Why did the prince invite County Magistrate Li? Then they realized another problem. How could a small county officer be qualified to attend the princess's birthday banquet? Even Prefectural Magistrate Dong was slightly surprised by this matter. The emperor had personally written the title, the princess and Ning Wang both treated him. Was this County Magistrate Li not simple? Only County Magistrate Lu didn't feel strange at all. What was Ning Wang? Even if the servant had said, His Majesty invites him, he wouldn't have been surprised. After all, he had witnessed that scene with his own eyes. Why did Prince Ning invite me? As the person in question, Li Yi was also at a complete loss. This little one doesn't know. Li, hurry up and go with this little one. Don't let His Highness wait for too long. The servant urged. Li Yi turned his head to look at Wan Ruoqing. Before he spoke, Magistrate Dong waved his hand and said, Hurry up and go. I promise that after you leave, no one will make things difficult for this girl. Since Miss Ruoqing is not feeling well, you should go back and rest early. The words of the prefectural magistrate were very credible. Li Yi said to Wan Ruoqing and then left with the servant. On the way he was still thinking, could it be that Li Xian has been thinking too much recently and Ning Wang wants to get even with me? After thinking about it, he felt it was unlikely. After all, after countless tests, he was very confident about Li Xian's mental endurance. If he couldn't figure it out, he wouldn't think about it. After all, he had saved the princess. As a prince, he shouldn't be ungrateful and bite the hand that feeds him. Li, His Highness is upstairs. Go up by yourself. The servant brought him around. Li looked at the small building strangely, then looked at the servant again. Suddenly, the look in his eyes became a little strange. This small building was clearly the one behind them. Just now, he could have entered from the front door if he turned around. This guy led him in a big circle from the front door to the back door. Wasn't this crazy? He didn't want to argue with the crazy person. When he walked into the little building, he saw rows of guards with weapons in their hands. He thought that this Ning Wang was really extravagant. He didn't feel safe even in his own home. He walked up the stairs. The two guards at the door searched him before letting him in. Anshi County Military Officer Li Yi greets His Highness. After walking in, Li Yi first bowed. Scholars only knelt to their parents and the emperor. His Highness was one level lower than the emperor and only needed to bow twice. After bowing, he raised his head and saw the figures in the room. He was slightly startled. Apart from Ning Wang, who he had only seen in the portrait, everyone in the room was familiar. Li Xian, who was frowning at him, looked coldly at his Emingzu, the high-ranking official who had just treated him to a meal in the garden, and the coffin-faced old man standing behind him. Li Yi sighed in his heart. As expected of a high-ranking official, to be able to sit at the same table as Ning Wang, he must at least be a first-rank official. Then he saw the rank 1 official suddenly clutching his chest. His breathing quickened and a pained expression appeared on his face. In the next moment, his entire body stiffly fell to the ground. Imperial uncle. Imperial brother. Imperial father. Your Majesty. The expressions of the people in the room changed at the same time. There were a few panicked voices. The old eunuch named Changde was the fastest. His figure flashed and disappeared in front of them. He caught Emperor Jing before he fell. Come, quick, call for the imperial physician. The current emperor was suffering from asthma. No matter where he went, there would be an imperial physician. Even if he hid it from the court officials, it was impossible not to bring an imperial physician. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a response from outside the door. Two figures rushed downstairs. Li Yi, who had been ignored by everyone, stood in the room with a dumbfounded expression. Imperial brother, imperial father, his majesty, this title. The person who had just treated him to a meal in the garden was actually the emperor? Oh no, his majesty has no pulse. The old eunuch put two fingers on Emperor Jing's wrist. His expression changed and he immediately reached out to pinch Emperor Jing's philtrum. Damn, there's no pulse and his heart has stopped. What's the use of pinching his philtrum? Seeing this, Li Yi muttered in his heart. Even someone as steady as Prince Ning had cold sweat on his forehead. If something happened to his imperial brother in Prince Ning's mansion, the court officials would not care if he was Prince Ning. They would probably accuse him of regicide. Seeing the old man pinching with all his might, Li Yi finally couldn't help but walk over and say, "It's useless to pinch like this. Go away." Changde did not care about anything else at this time. He did not even raise his head and said angrily. Li Yi was slightly annoyed, but he thought that the old man was probably anxious at this moment. It was understandable, so he did not care too much. At this moment, Mingzi grabbed his arm. For the first time, an extremely anxious expression appeared on her usually indifferent face. "You have a way." She was very clear about Li Yi's various magical methods. The princess consort's stubborn illness was also cured by him. Thinking of this, Mingzi looked at him with eyes full of expectation. Chapter 170. I'm not 100% sure. Li Yi hesitated and looked at her. When he was in primary school, the school would have several first aid classes every year, such as artificial respiration, cardiac compression, simple bandaging, and so on. Of course, at that time, it was limited to the level of science and there was no chance to practice it. Occasionally he would fantasize that the most beautiful girl in the class would suddenly faint, and then as a boy he could be the hero to save the beauty, openly doing something that was indescribable at that age. However, the person in front of him was not an ordinary person. He was the emperor of a country, the absolute ruler of a feudal society. If something went wrong, even 10 heads would not be enough for him to chop off. Based on today's situation, he might not even have the chance to escape with Rui and the others. But if he didn't do anything and just watched the old man pinch his philtrum, he was afraid that before the imperial doctor arrived, this high-ranking emperor would have already passed away. Even if he didn't deserve to die, he would be strangled to death by the old man. If the emperor died unexpectedly here, no one present would be able to escape. It was a disaster either way. Li Yi couldn't help feeling a little depressed. Why did Prince Ning call him over for no reason? Wasn't this a trap for him? He didn't know whether to save him or not. Just as he was struggling in his heart, the old man also found that pinching the philtrum seemed to be really useless. His Majesty still showed no signs of waking up. Suddenly hearing Princess Yongla's words, he grabbed Li Yi and asked, "Do you have a way to save His Majesty? At least I can hold on until the imperial doctor comes." Li Yi nodded and could only bite the bullet. After all, he was a good youth who had developed morally, intellectually, physically, and aesthetically. It was better than this old man messing around here. Hurry up and save him. If anything happens to His Majesty, be careful of your life. Thinking of what the prince had said just now, that the princess's stubborn illness was also cured by him, the old man gritted his teeth and looked at Li Yi sinisterly. "Then you should do it." Li Yi immediately took a step back. If he couldn't save His Majesty, he would be wronged. "You." The old man looked at him with fire in his eyes. Just as he said one word, a stern voice came. "Chief Steward Chang." Mingzi stopped Changde, then turned to look at Li Yi and said, "Hurry up and make your move. No matter what the result is, I will pardon you." Li Yi thought to himself that the daughter of the old Li family was indeed reasonable. At this time, Steward Chang had already stepped aside. Earlier, he had already digested a number of first aid manuals in his mind. He felt the emperor's left chest, which was still in a coma. Just now the old man had said that there was no pulse. As expected, it was a cardiac arrest. Li Yi immediately clenched his right hand into a fist and punched the emperor's chest a few times. Impudent. Seeing this, the old man's face changed. He immediately bent his palm into a claw and grabbed at Li Yi's shoulder with a whistling sound. With such a heavy blow to His Majesty's chest, could it be that he was not trying to save His Majesty, but was trying to kill His Majesty? At this critical moment, a white shadow suddenly flew across the air. Mingzi kicked the old man's hand away and said coldly, "Chief Steward Chang, I know you are eager to save His Majesty, but if you continue to obstruct me, it will only delay Father's treatment." Hearing this, a look of hesitation appeared on the old man's face. He could not make a move on the princess. When he looked down again, the young man had already crossed his hands and was pressing on His Majesty's chest. Although this was still a strange method that he had never heard of, it was at least acceptable to him compared to what he had done just now. Without a defibrillator, Li Yi could only use this more direct and violent method to help the heart beat. Next was conventional chest compressions. There was no epinephrine, no glucose solution, no nicotinamide, loblin, and dexamethasone, which he had never even heard of before. Naturally, he could only use this simplified first aid method. During barehanded CPR, artificial respiration and chest compressions were carried out in a certain ratio. Next was the project that Li Yi had been looking forward to the most since he was a child. However, looking at the face of the Jing Kingdom's emperor, the corner of Li Yi's mouth could not help but twitch. He could not do it no matter how hard he tried. His Majesty has a pulse. When Li Yi was doing chest compressions, the old man's hand had been on Jingdi's wrist. At a certain moment, a hint of joy suddenly appeared on his face and he blurted out. As soon as this was said, everyone in the room breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing his magic again, Emingzi looked at Li Yi with an extraordinary splendor in her eyes. Even Prince Ning wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, and a little gratitude appeared on his face. If something happened to His Majesty here, Prince Ning Mansion could not escape the blame. "I need someone to help me." In the end, Li Yi could not overcome the hurdle in his heart and raised his head to say this. "I'll do it." Hearing this, the old man immediately said without hesitation, "Tilt His Majesty's head back, pinch His Majesty's nose, and blow air into His Majesty's mouth." Li Yi tried to make his meaning easy for others to understand. "That's called dragon head, dragon nose?" The old man glared at him and said, "Why do you have to do this?" Pinching His Majesty's nose and blowing air into His Majesty's mouth, this was already a great disrespect to His Majesty. In order to carry out the gas exchange between the gaps to ensure that the blood provided in the artificial circulation process has enough oxygen. Looking at the old man's dumbfounded face, Li Yi said impatiently, "Do you understand? Whether you understand or not, just do it." Although Li Yi's attitude was not good, the old man was not annoyed at all. His Majesty's pulse had begun to beat, which showed that his method was effective. At this moment, he did not care about whether he had offended His Majesty or not. He recalled what the young man had just said, walked to the front, and leaned over to put his old face, lift His Majesty's dragon chin, pinch the dragon nose tightly. "Yes, that's it. Continue, don't stop." Li Yi could already feel that the emperor's heart had begun to beat. The time for CPR was not long, about 2 to 3 minutes. The brain's tolerance time for hypoxia was 4 to 6 minutes. Even if the emperor woke up after this time, there would be varying degrees of damage. The tolerance time for other tissues was a little longer. Based on this, after this high-ranking emperor woke up, he should not have any dementia or paralysis. After about 10 minutes or so, although the emperor had not woken up, his breathing had returned to normal, and his heart had begun to beat steadily. Only then did Li Yi ask the old man to stop. Seeing that the old man stood up without a red face and was not panting, Li Yi was also surprised. This old man was not bad. After blowing for so long, he actually did not feel dizzy. His lung capacity was too unbelievable. This old man was reckless just now. "I hope you don't take it to heart, little brother." After feeling His Majesty's pulse, the old man was finally relieved. His face had also begun to become ruddy. He knelt on one knee and said to Li Yi with a fist and palm salute, "Forget it, forget it." Li Yi could also understand him. He waved his hand and supported the old man a few times with both hands. Only then did the old man stand up. What's wrong with this emperor?" A weak voice came. Prince Ning and the old man immediately stepped forward and helped Emperor Jing up. Sitting on the chair, Emperor Jing was just about to speak when he suddenly touched the top of his lips and could not help but let out a soft hiss. "Why does it hurt so much here?" Li Yi thought in his heart. That old man just pinched so hard, it would be strange if it did not hurt. This old servant deserves to die. The old man surnamed Chang knelt on the ground with a thud. Chapter 171. Emperor Jing was supported by several guards to another room to rest. Li Xian secretly gave a thumbs up to Li Yi and followed Prince Ning. What happened today made Li Yi secretly vigilant in his heart. In the future, he still had to stay away from these emperors and princes. If the other party suddenly fainted or died suddenly like this, wouldn't he be implicated? The efficiency of the imperial physicians was very slow. Li Yi sat here and drank a cup of tea before the two officials of the Imperial Physician Bureau came late. Of course, the price of being late was being scolded by the effeminate old man outside the door like a grandson. However, these two guys deserved it. As the Emperor's personal Imperial physicians, why did they come here? If there was any sudden situation and they didn't treat the Emperor in time, the two of them could only use the rock-paper-scissors game to decide who should be the first to be beheaded. What should be done was done. Li Yi wanted to leave, but Prince Ning had just said that he should wait here and wait for His Majesty's summons. The idea of going back to sleep early could only be put aside for the time being. He was also very unlucky to meet the Emperor while strolling in the garden. He began to think if he had said anything disrespectful just now. It seemed that he did, but it seemed that he didn't. Only ghosts would remember so much. In this way, that Constable Mingzu was really a princess? She didn't want to be a princess, but she came to be a constable. Was it not enough for her to be alone? She had to drag him down with her. She was really crazy. The two officials of the Imperial Physician Bureau were scolded. They lowered their heads and went into the room to diagnose the Emperor to make sure that there was nothing wrong with the Emperor's body. After they left, they continued to be scolded. In the room where Li Yi was, 2 rows of armored guards with weapons stood neatly. He had just picked up the second cup of tea, but before he had time to take a sip, a guard came out of the room and bowed. "Lord Li, His Majesty summons you." Standing up from his seat, under the guidance of the guard, he walked to the door of another room. From afar he saw Ning Wang and Li Mingzu sitting on the two sides. The one he had seen in the garden, the one he thought was a high official, was actually the Emperor's man lying on the bed. There were 2 other women in the room. One was Ning Wang Fei, the other he didn't know. "Shi County Lieutenant greets Your Majesty." In front of the Emperor, Li Yi could only kneel and pay his respects. Fortunately, the floor of the room was covered with a thick blanket, so he wouldn't feel uncomfortable kneeling on it. "You have done a meritorious deed in saving the Emperor, so there is no need to be overly courteous. Come have a seat." Emperor Jing's voice was still a little weak. Not long after he finished speaking, 2 guards brought a chair over. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Li Yi thanked. Just as he sat down, Ning Wang took a step forward and looked at the woman Li Yi didn't know. He said, "This is the Empress. County Lieutenant Li, you still need to pay your respects." Li Yi felt strange. The Emperor and Empress of the Jing Kingdom didn't stay in the palace, but ran around outside. Kneeling once was not enough, so he had to stand up and pay his respects again. The Empress sat at the front and looked at him. There was satisfaction in her phoenix eyes. Just now, when His Majesty had summoned him, she and Ning Wang Fei had left. When they learned that His Majesty had fainted, they had jumped in fright. Knowing that it was this young man who saved the Emperor, she naturally saw him in a different light. "Li Yi of Anxi County, you have done a meritorious deed in saving the Emperor. How do you want me to reward you?" Hearing this, Li Yi was happy. Should he take this opportunity to ask the Emperor to take back his order and not let him be a county lieutenant? However, the position of county lieutenant had just been conferred, and he hadn't had time to take it yet. If he asked to resign, wouldn't it be like letting the Emperor slap his own face? As the saying goes, a ruler doesn't joke. The ancient Emperor seemed to take this matter very seriously. If he made such a request, would it anger him? Forget it, he wouldn't take this risk. He put his hands honestly on his thighs and said seriously, "His Majesty is fine. It is already the greatest reward from heaven to me. I dare not ask for credit again." He was not that stupid. The Emperor asked this out of politeness. He should reward as he should. No matter how much he said, it was better to flatter him. When Li Xian heard this, he almost couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of air. No matter how he listened, it didn't sound like something he should say. "I have always been clear about rewards and punishments. Those who have meritorious deeds will be rewarded, and those who have sinned will be punished." Emperor Jing was very happy with his words. There was a smile on his pale face and he said, "Li Yi, come forward and receive your reward." Li Yi couldn't help but look bitter. Well, he just sat down for a while and he had to kneel again. "Li Yi of Anxi County, for saving the Emperor, will be rewarded with 100 bolts of silk, 100 acres of fertile land and 10,000 gold. There was no official title, but there were a lot of material rewards. 100 bolts of silk and 100 acres of fertile land. Li Yi didn't feel much about it, but the 10,000 gold, at the end really scared him. According to the market price, 10,000 gold could be exchanged for 100,000 silver, and 1 silver could be exchanged for 1,000 copper coins. How much was 100,000 times 1,000? Was a lot. With 10,000 taels of gold, there was no need for her to sell Ruidu and spirits. She could even stop selling perfume and fragrant soap. She could go back home and guard the mountain of gold and that 100 mu of fertile land. She and Rui could live a carefree and happy life as landlords and housewives. In an instant, Li Yi's good impression of the emperor rose. Such a generous emperor must be a good emperor. I thank your majesty for your grace. This time he bowed with sincerity. Li Yi, can you cure father's illness? When he returned to his seat again, a clear voice came. When he turned his head, he found that Emingzu was looking at him with a burning gaze. As soon as she finished speaking, everyone looked at Li Yi. What illness does his majesty suffer from? Li Yi still didn't know what illness the emperor had. He fainted for no reason, so it shouldn't be a simple illness. Asthma? The two imperial physicians were called in. After listening to their description, Li Yi had a general idea in his heart. The asthma they were talking about should be asthma. Asthma wasn't a good illness. Even in modern times, there didn't seem to be a cure for it. As Li Yi searched for information in his mind, he shook his head and said, "This illness is extremely difficult to cure. We can only take more precautions and reduce the number of attacks." Li Yi wasn't a doctor. Moreover, even if modern doctors were here, they wouldn't be able to do anything without special medicine. To be able to become an imperial physician in the palace, they definitely had some skills. If even they couldn't cure it, how could Li Yi? He could only tell them some things to pay attention to from the perspective of avoiding contact with allergens. For example, they should frequently dry their bedding, open the windows frequently for ventilation, keep the room clean, and recommend the use of soap produced by Rui Workshop. As for food, they should eat less seafood and eat more red dates, lotus seeds, and yam. These were all things that were written in books. Li Yi organized his words. A guard had already brought a pen and paper, and the two imperial physicians were writing at a rapid speed. Li Yi glanced at them, but he didn't recognize any of the words written on the paper. It seemed that the prescription was not the original creation of Western medicine in that world. He only hoped that he could still recognize the words written by them tomorrow. Chapter 172. It's best not to have birds or beasts around His Majesty. Remember not to drink alcohol. After explaining all the precautions for asthma prevention, Li Yi was about to leave when he suddenly sniffed and smelled a familiar fragrance in the air. He seemed to think of something and asked, "Did the princess and her highness use perfume?" The two nodded at the same time and asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" His Majesty's asthma cannot be smelled too strongly. Perfume and Rui dew are both included. No wonder there was a similar smell in the room just now. Li Yi didn't notice it at that time. Now he remembered that the princess and the empress had probably stayed in that room. The emperor had asthma. It was a blessing from heaven that he didn't die of asthma after being attacked by the two women's perfume. The empress's expression changed when she heard this. She suddenly said, "Is it because of the Rui dew that His Majesty's asthma has worsened these days?" Li Yi was stunned. Rui dew and perfume. She couldn't wait for the emperor to die. Quick, remember these two things. After listening to Li Yi's words, the empress told the imperial physician and hurriedly took the princess to take a bath. Emingzu also left silently. Before leaving, she glanced at Li Yi. When she passed by, Li Yi also smelled a familiar smell. 3. It seemed that this emperor must be a good emperor. He had done a lot of good deeds in his life. Otherwise he would not have lived until now. After bowing and bidding farewell, the guards naturally sent him away. Just as he went downstairs and walked a few steps, Li Xian followed him. For Li Xian, Li Yi was a huge treasure. Every time they met, he could dig out some treasure from him. The mystery in his heart was constantly refreshed. If he wanted to attract a man for a long time, he must always maintain a sense of mystery in front of him. In this regard, Li Yi obviously did a good job. Cough, cough. From time to time, the sound of Jing Di coughing could be heard in the room. "Brother, should we call the imperial physician over?" Prince Ning asked in a slightly worried tone when he saw this. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "There's no need. I know my body. It's fine now." Is Xian'er in contact with Li Yi often? After a while, the coughing gradually subsided, and his voice was heard again. "Yes, even in front of us, Xian'er often mentions him." King Ning's voice paused before he added, "Emingzu also seems to have a close relationship with him." Emperor Jing sat up and asked, "Have you investigated his background?" "I've already checked it thoroughly. There's nothing wrong with it." King Ning replied, "This boy is young but extremely talented. The few poems he has written are widely spread in Qing and Fu. Su Xuezheng once publicly called him the #1 scholar of the Jing kingdom. In addition, the Rui dew and perfume and even the strong liquor that you praised so much today were all his works. King Ning continued, his medical skills also seemed to be very high. Not long ago Ro-er was suffering from a chronic illness. I searched everywhere for famous doctors but to no avail. Even the two imperial physicians were helpless. Yet she was easily cured by him. Brother should have some understanding of his medical skills. When King Ning said this, an unnatural expression appeared on Emperor Jing's face. Although he couldn't care so much at that time, when he thought of the time he fainted, Changda, he felt his stomach churn and forced himself not to think about this. After thinking for a while, he opened his mouth and said, "If that's the case, this boy can be considered an extraordinary person and can be of great use. I originally wanted to move him to the capital and train him for a few years. When he follows father in the future, it would be good to leave a loyal official for him. Thinking about it carefully, this is still too ostentatious. I'm afraid he will be targeted by those people. In addition to Mingzhu's request, I'll let him stay here for now." Hearing this, King Ning was slightly shocked. He didn't think that his brother would think so highly of him. What the two of them talked about next was already a very secretive matter. He waved his attendants away, leaving only Elder Chang behind. No one else could hear the conversation between the two of them. At the same time, Li Yi had already walked out of the gates of the manor. He waved his hand at Li Xian, indicating that he didn't need to send him off. The banquet in the manor was still going on. The high officials and nobles ate, drank, laughed, and chatted. The scholars were singing about romance. No one knew that just now, in the small building behind them, something big enough to shake the entire Jing kingdom had happened. What they were curious and confused about was why King Ning and the princess didn't show up tonight. Among the new Jinshi, Cui Yinxin and Jiangzi, and were probably the most depressed. One was really depressed because he had forced himself to write a new poem. The other was upset because he was rejected by the girl he once liked and could only drink the wine of the manor to relieve his worries. At this time, Li Yi had just come out of the manor and was about to walk back to his shop. He turned his head slightly and saw the figure still waiting by the roadside. "Miss Ruoqing, you haven't gone back yet?" he asked in confusion as he walked over. "Li, you're out?" Wan Ruoqing's face was still very pale. When she saw Li Yi, a smile appeared on her face. She bowed to him and said, "Thank you, Li, for helping Ruoqing just now." Li Yi waved his hand. "Let's not talk about this. You don't look very well. Do you need to see a doctor?" Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, "No need. I'm afraid the clinic is already closed. Let's talk about it tomorrow." Li Yi had stayed in the manor for about 2 hours. It wasn't too late yet. It was probably around 9 o'clock. The nightlife of the ancients wasn't that rich. After the sky darkened, other than the brothels and taverns that had a lot of customers at night, the other shops would basically be closed. Naturally, there was no way to find a doctor now. Although Qing and Prefecture also had a curfew, and it probably started at this time, the management was relatively lax. In addition, tonight was a special occasion, so one wouldn't be caught walking on the road. "Then I'll take you back first," Li Yi said in a gentlemanly manner. It wasn't safe for her to walk back alone in the middle of the night. "Li, are you going back to Rui workshop?" Li Yi froze for a moment, then nodded. "Then we're going the same way," Wan Ruoqing said with a smile. Li Yi wasn't surprised that she knew where he lived. Rui workshop had already become famous in Qing and Prefecture. Last time at the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet, some bored person had put the title of the top scholar in the Jing kingdom on him. It had also made him a little famous. There was a high chance of being recognized on the road, so naturally, his residence wasn't a secret. The two walked side by side. Before they left the boundaries of the manor, there was a sudden rush of footsteps behind them. "Master Li, please wait." Li looked back and saw a white-haired old man jogging over. Chapter 173. The old man looked a little familiar. After thinking for a while, he remembered his identity. He was one of the imperial physicians who had been scolded by Steward Chang like a grandson just now. They were both old, but this imperial physician obviously didn't live as well as the other. After being scolded, he didn't even have the courage to talk back. "I'm Lu Jimin, the new imperial physician of this dynasty. Milord Li, please stay." This white-haired imperial physician Lu was old. He trotted all the way out of the prince's mansion and was still out of breath at this moment. "Milord Lu, is there something urgent?" Li Yi thought in his heart, could it be that His Majesty's illness was acting up again? This time he wouldn't go back even if he was beaten to death. He only knew a little about modern first aid, but he knew nothing about medical skills. After all, medical skills were real skills. Even if he digested all the books about Chinese medicine in the library, he couldn't become a famous doctor. If His Majesty really died and he had an alibi, he couldn't be blamed, right? Moreover, this old man claimed to be the imperial physician of this dynasty and the dean of the Royal Medical College of the Jing Kingdom. He might be one of the best doctors in the whole country. If he couldn't do anything, it would be useless for him to go. Imperial physician Lu stood in the same place for a while and calmed his heartbeat. Then he looked at Li Yi and asked with a smile, "Milord Li, do you know medical skills?" Compared with the ministers in the capital, the imperial physician's rank was not high, but it was much higher than a small county officer of the 8th rank, so there was no need to call him milord. But he just saw with his own eyes that His Majesty appreciated this young man very much. What's more, if he hadn't saved His Majesty in time, he probably wouldn't have the opportunity to stand here now. Instead, he would be discussing with another medical deputy about who would be the first to lose his head. His Majesty's health had always been their biggest concern. This time, His Majesty suddenly fainted, and there was a great possibility that he would never wake up again. Even if he was present at that time, he couldn't guarantee that he could definitely save His Majesty. To some extent, the young man in front of them had done a lot for them. Putting all these aside, as a doctor, he was also extremely curious about the method Li Yi had used to save His Majesty. If they could learn this method, they wouldn't be at a loss when similar situations occur in the future. If they could spread this method to the world, allowing all doctors and even ordinary people to grasp it, how many lives would be saved? It would be a great deed that would benefit the people for generations to come. Medical skills? Li Yi was stunned for a moment, then he looked at Imperial Physician Lu and said, "Sorry, I don't know anything about this." What he said was the truth. Any middle school student in the 21st century would know a little about CPR and artificial respiration. Could it be that all of them knew medical skills? Imperial Physician Lu just casually asked. If he didn't know medicine, how could he treat His Majesty just now? In her heart, she had long regarded him as a person with extraordinary skills. As long as he waited for Li Yi's affirmative answer, he could continue to delve into this topic. At this moment, his mouth was opened halfway, but the words he wanted to say were blocked. After a moment of stunned, Imperial Physician Lu showed a dry smile on his face and said, "Milord Li is too modest. To be honest, I want to ask Milord Li for advice about the treatment just now." Speaking of this, Imperial Physician Lu glanced at Wan Ruoqing, who was beside Li Yi, but he didn't say the following words. His Majesty went out incognito this time, and even the civil and military officials in the court didn't know about it. Of course, he couldn't mention it in front of outsiders. Wan Ruoqing understood his meaning. She looked at Li Yi and said with a smile, "Milord Li still has something important to do, so Ruoqing will leave first." "What, Milord Li? We are all friends. You don't have to be so polite." Li Yi waved his hand, looked at Imperial Physician Lu and said, "Milord Lu, it's late and I have to send my friend back. Why don't we talk while walking? It's really inappropriate for this girl to walk alone in the middle of the night. I will accompany Milord Li for a walk." Imperial Physician Lu glanced at Wan Ruoqing and moved his eyebrows. Wan Ruoqing understood and silently walked behind them, keeping a distance from them. This old man thinks too much. It's good to have Miss Wan accompanying him. Who wants an old man to accompany her? When Li Yi was thinking about this in his heart, Imperial Physician Lu had already whispered, "I don't know if Milord Li can teach me the method of treating His Majesty just now. Milord Li knows that His Majesty's body is not well. If something like today happens again in the future, we can save His Majesty in time." For the symptoms of fainting, even the Imperial Physician Bureau didn't have any effective method at present. Today, seeing such a strange technique, Imperial Physician Lu would not let go of it for public or private reasons. It turns out that Milord Lu wants to learn this cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Only now did Li Yi understand that this was the purpose of this old man chasing him. It was not a big deal. There was no concept of patent in this world, and this was not like the formula of Ruidu that could make money. Teaching it to Imperial Physician Lu was also a thing to benefit society. CPR? Although Imperial Physician Lu had never heard of this name, he could still understand the words heart, lungs, and recovery. When he thought about how he could restore His Majesty's pulse in a short time, didn't it mean recovery? Milord Li is willing to teach me? He turned his head and looked at Li Yi with some excitement. This cardiopulmonary resuscitation is not a secret. If Milord Lu can learn it, it will also be a blessing for the common people. Li Yi said with a smile. Milord Li is so righteous. On behalf of the common people, I thank Milord Li. Imperial Physician Lu cupped his hands at Li Yi and said seriously, "Milord Lu is too courteous." Li Yi waved his hand. When he spoke again, he had already started to introduce to Imperial Physician Lu the suitable occasions for CPR, the specific procedures and things to take note of. As the Imperial Physician and the Dean of the Jing Kingdom's Royal Academy of Medicine, Imperial Physician Lu was like a student who thirsted for knowledge. His face was solemn and he carefully remembered every word that Li Yi said in his heart. Wan Ruoqing was not far behind the two of them. She watched as Li Yi talked with the high-ranking official with fervor and assurance. The other party looked serious and serious. Her pretty face was slightly absent-minded. When they first met, he was still an unfamiliar scholar who stretched out his hand to ask for osmanthus cake from her. For the reward of 100 taels of silver, he helped Union Poetry Club compose 2 poems, which left a deep impression in her heart. Of course, at that time, she did not know that he was the scholar who wrote Immortal on the Magpie Bridge and became popular in the prefectural city. When they met for the second time, it was at Mianxiu Garden, where the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet was held. That day she was put in a difficult position by the second scholar of Qin and Prefecture, Xinzhao. He used Shuidiao Getu to shock everyone and Xinzhao tore the poem out of anger. From then on, his reputation in Qin and Prefecture was not as good as before. But with just 2 poems he was crowned the #1 scholar in Qin and Prefecture and even in the Jing Kingdom. He was probably the most unconventional #1 scholar in history. He never participated in poetry meets or poetry recitals, and he did not accept invitations from socialites. The strange items that he sold in his shop in the city were once again popular in the prefectural city. She only knew that the Rui Square next to the brothel was actually his shop when she saw him leave the shop once. Every time she went in and out of the shop, she slightly hoped for a chance encounter like that. Later on, she learned that he came and went without a pattern, so she did not run into him again. She did not expect that the two of them would meet again in such a way in the prince's mansion tonight. Writing a new poem to express sorrow, she softly murmured these words, and a trace of a smile appeared on her pale face. Chapter 174. In this way, this CPR can save lives in times of crisis and has the power to reverse the situation. If this skill can be popularized, it can not only reduce many unnecessary casualties in the army, but also be used in the common people. It's really a wonderful skill that will benefit the common people and the future generations. Your Excellency, Li should take the first credit. Li Yi told all the details about CPR to Dr. Lu. He didn't need to explain the principle. As the imperial physician and the head of the imperial physicians in the palace, it was like showing off one's slight skill in front of an expert if he talked too much in front of him. It was very important. After listening to Li Yi, Dr. Lu asked some questions about the details along the way. When he finally understood it completely, Li Yi had almost reached the door. I've been a doctor for dozens of years, but I've never heard of this CPR. I wonder which famous doctor is your master? Dr. Lu certainly didn't think that this unique secret skill was created by the young county magistrate Li in front of him. Although he was the imperial physician, he didn't think that his medical skills were the best in the world. In this world, there were still some famous doctors who devoted themselves to medical skills and didn't care about official career. In Dr. Lu's view, this CPR must be created by one of them. And this county magistrate Li was very likely to be their disciple or successor. To be honest, I don't know the name of the person who taught me this skill, Li Yi said with a little regret. What do you mean? Dr. Lu looked at him in doubt. It was a winter a few years ago. Li Yi's expression was solemn as he started to spout nonsense with a straight face. It was a cold winter that year. The north wind was biting cold and the snow blocked the mountain. One morning, I opened the door and saw a white-haired old man lying in front of the door. When Imperial Physician Lu heard this, his expression became serious. According to the plot of the novel, this old man should be the famous doctor of the present age. It's snowing so heavily outside. If I left him alone, I'm afraid that the old man would freeze to death in front of the door. So, I helped him into the house and made him some ginger soup to warm him up. Then I asked him to stay at home for a few days. When the snow melted, the old man bade farewell and left. Before he left, he taught me the CPR technique and I haven't heard from him since then. Li Yi sighed. His gaze was unfocused, and a nostalgic expression appeared on his face. It seems that the old man must be one of the most extraordinary people in the world. Imperial Physician Lu's eyes lit up and then he sighed with some regret. Not being able to get to know such a person would be one of the greatest regrets in his life. Then he looked at Li Yi and a light flashed in his eyes. He said, "Just now when I talked with Lord Li, I found that Lord Li has a lot of unique views on medicine. It's really a waste of your talent to be a small county lieutenant here. Why don't I recommend Lord Li to the Imperial Physician Bureau and let Lord Li join the Imperial Physician Bureau? What do you think? Since this magistrate Li had interacted with a famous doctor for a few days, who knew what else he had learned other than CPR? After all, those people were moving treasures. Even the Imperial Physicians Bureau valued the medical experience they had accumulated over their lifetime. Li Yi sighed in his heart. From the officials to the emperor in the Jing kingdom, they were all the same. They wanted someone to be an official just because they didn't agree with him. He hadn't even taken office as a county lieutenant, but the Imperial Physician Bureau had offered him an olive branch. What was so good about the Jing kingdom? He didn't have a wife, a maid, or a sister-in-law. It was better to be a small county lieutenant here. Li Yi made a comparison and found that being a county lieutenant in Anxi County was not so bad. He turned his head to look at Imperial Physician Lu with a smile and said, "Lord Lu, you're off topic." Imperial Physician Lu expressed his regret that Lord Li refused his proposal, but he could only regret it. If Lord Li didn't want to go to the Imperial Physician Bureau, he couldn't force him. When Imperial Physician Lu sighed, Li Yi raised his head. The signboard of Rui Workshop was already close at hand. Unknowingly they had arrived at the door. Before he could say a few words to Miss Ruoqing, Li Yi saw that she was still far behind them. He felt a little sorry in his heart and walked over to her and said, "Where does Miss Ruoqing live?" "Just in Rui." Wan Ruoqing smiled and raised her head to point at the brothel next to Rui Workshop. As soon as she raised her arm, she suddenly felt dizzy, and then she was swept by a deep tiredness. The last consciousness she had was probably that familiar voice anxiously calling, "Miss Ruoqing, Miss Ruoqing." After that, she completely lost consciousness. "Lord Lu, what's wrong with Miss Ruoqing?" In a room in the backyard of Rui Workshop, Li Yi watched Imperial Physician Lu withdraw his hand from Ruoqing's wrist and asked, "It's okay." Imperial Physician Lu smiled and said, "Lord Li, don't worry. This girl is just too tired and physically weak. In addition, her monthly period is coming and she occasionally has a cold. I'll prescribe some medicine. If she takes it as a hint, she will recover in 2 days." Imperial Physician Lu went to write the prescription. Fang stood by the bed and looked at the beautiful girl lying on the bed of the son-in-law. He didn't understand it for a while. Didn't the son-in-law say that he was going to attend a banquet when he left? Where did he bring a girl back? Was the banquet held in the Jade Courtyard? Or the son-in-law said that he was going to attend the banquet was actually a cover, and his real purpose was to go there to have fun? But if he wanted to have fun, everyone was a man, so Fang could understand. But there was no need to bring a girl to his home. "Son-in-law, it's so late at night and the pharmacy is closed. There is no place to buy medicine." Fang no longer thought about where Li Yi picked up the beautiful girl at night and said while holding the prescription, "It doesn't matter. You take me to the pharmacy and there will be a way to buy medicine." Imperial Physician Lu heard the words and said with a smile, "Tonight, County Magistrate Li did him a lot of kindness. Helping him do some small things was also a repayment. The identity of the Dean of the Royal Medical College was very useful at some times." Imperial Physician Lu and Fang didn't go out for a long time and came back with a few medicines. Behind them was an old doctor of the pharmacy, who stood respectfully behind Imperial Physician Lu. The old doctor stared at the back of Imperial Physician Lu with a look of worship. He didn't know that his idol had just been scolded like a grandson for a long time. Ruoqing would wake up after a short rest. After Imperial Physician Lu and Li Yi exchanged a few words, he left. Fang went outside to boil the medicine. The clay pot was also taken from the pharmacy. Li Yi sat in front of the bed and saw Ruoqing on the bed frowning slightly. Her face was pale. He reached out to touch her forehead and estimated that her body temperature had exceeded 38 degrees. Her body temperature was not low. He found the liquor that Fang had hidden in the pharmacy. After several distilling processes, the liquor had a temperature of 30 to 40 degrees, which could be used to cool down physically. He dipped the towel in alcohol and wiped some on her forehead and palms. As for other places, Li Yi didn't dare to touch them. Although the effect would be greatly reduced, there was no legitimate reason to take off a woman's clothes when she was asleep in this era. Wan Ruoqing blinked her eyelashes. After she tried to open her eyes, she saw such a scene. Li Yi put one hand on her forehead and the other hand touched his own forehead. He was still muttering. "It's a little cooler than before. The fever seems to have gone down." Chapter 175. Li. She had just woken up and had not fully recovered her consciousness. She looked at Li Yi and blinked her eyes innocently. "You're awake?" Li Yi withdrew his hand from her forehead and said, "This is Rui House. You just fainted outside. He paused and said, "You're not feeling well. Instead of resting at home, you went to sing that song." Wan Ruoqing's pretty face showed a bitter smile. Some things were beyond her control. For them, she had long been used to these things. She supported her body to sit up and said apologetically, "I'm sorry to have troubled you. Don't always call me young master. I'm not used to it." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "The medicine is being brewed outside. Since you live in the brothel next door, you don't have to rush back. Drink the medicine before you leave. By the way, have you eaten?" Wan Ruoqing shook her head. As performers and singers, they couldn't eat too much before performing. They could only eat 20% full. Any more would affect their singing. Every time she went out to perform, she was used to bringing some osmanthus cakes. When she was really hungry, she would eat 2 pieces. Tonight, she had already distributed all the cakes she brought to others. "It just so happens that I'm not full either. You sit here for a while." Although it was not a good habit to eat after 9 o'clock in the evening, it was not appropriate for her to drink medicine on an empty stomach. In addition, Li Yi did not have enough to eat in the prince's mansion. Because of the emperor's fainting, he was really a little hungry now. Fang set up a fire in the corner of the yard and waited for the medicine in the clay pot to be done. Seeing Li Yi go into the kitchen and start to work, he looked into the room and sighed deeply. Does the son-in-law want to keep that woman for the night? Since the son-in-law did not hide from him, it showed that he had absolute trust in him. But if he helped him hide it, he felt sorry for First Mississippi. In Fang's heart, he began a new struggle. After a moment, he still made a decision. Some things were done wrong once and they would continue to be wrong. The more he hid it from First Miss, the less guilty he felt. Wan Ruoqing watched Li Yi go out and sat up straight on the bed. There was a small stool next to the bed with a small jar of wine on it. She could smell it from the smell of the wine jar. He touched his forehead and felt that it was ice cold. He brought his palm closer to his forehead and sniffed it. There was a faint smell of alcohol. She had recovered a lot at this time. Although her body was still a little uncomfortable, the dizziness was gone. Just now, she vaguely felt that someone was wiping her forehead and palm. It shouldn't be an illusion. Although she didn't know the reason why she felt better should have something to do with this. Just now, the imperial physician had humbly consulted in front of him. His medical skills should be very good. Various thoughts flashed through her mind. After a while, she raised her head and began to observe her surroundings. It wasn't a big room. She was currently on a bed in the corner. The room's furnishings were very simple. There was a bed, a table, and a chair. There was a wooden shelf with toiletries on it. It was easy to see at a glance. There were no books, brush, ink, paper, or inkstone in the room. On the wall opposite her, there was a strange painting. The reason why it was strange was that this painting was obviously not the mainstream painting method, nor was it a three-dimensional painting that she had seen before. Instead, it was somewhat similar to the painting method on the sky prayer lantern that she still had in her collection. The lines were extremely simple and casual. The thing in the painting was like a house cat. It had 3 whiskers on its left and right sides. Its eyes and nose were small round dots. There was no mouth, and there was a strange thing on its left ear, which she had never seen before. A strange scholar, a strange painting. Thinking about it this way, it didn't seem that strange anymore. The porridge on the stove would take a while to be ready. Li Yi came in with a bowl, walked to the bed and handed it to her, then said, "Drink more brown sugar and ginger water, it's good for your body." Brown sugar and ginger water could disperse the cold, stop coughing and stop vomiting. It was much gentler than drinking medicine. Of course, Imperial Physician Lu said that her menstruation was coming. Menstruation was the meaning of the great aunt. Brown sugar could replenish the blood, so it should be good for her to drink it, right? Li Yi did not stay in the shop for long, so the furnishings in the room were very simple. But because he had to cook for himself, the kitchen had all kinds of utensils, seasonings and so on. Brown sugar and ginger were all there. Wan Ruoqing took the bowl in a daze. As a woman, she naturally knew the effects of brown sugar and ginger water. Every month, when her menstruation came, she would cook some to drink almost every day. What did he mean by what he just said? Did he know that she? Thinking that the white-haired old man was an imperial physician in the palace, Wan Ruoqing's pretty face turned red. When Li Yi returned to the kitchen, he looked at her strangely. This woman was really strange. Just now, her face was as white as paper, and now it turned red. The porridge was ordinary porridge with 2 side dishes. It was not a good habit to eat at night, but it was okay to indulge once in a while. After Wan Ruoqing drank the medicine, Li Yi sent her to the door. Entering the entrance of the brothel, Li Yi was surprised to find that Rui Square and the place where Wan Ruoqing lived were only separated by a wall. Sister Ruoqing, you are back? How was the prince's mansion? Did you have fun? It was a young girl who opened the door. When she saw Wan Ruoqing, her pretty face lit up. She chattered a few words, only to find that there was a stranger standing beside her. She suddenly froze there. Remember to drink the medicine on time. Li Yi exhorted her, waved his hand and turned back. Hearing the girl ask several times, such as, Sister Ruoqing, who is he? The sound of the door closing came from behind. In Rui Square, the expression on Fang's face was obviously much more relaxed. The son-in-law did not keep the girl for the night, so there was no need to consider the problem of loyalty. It was the best ending for both the son-in-law and eldest Mississippi. In Prince Ning's mansion, Cui Yinxing gulped down another mouthful of wine. His head was already dizzy. Brother Cui bottoms up. Opposite him Jiangzi, and raised his wine cup. Tonight the two could be regarded as brothers in hardship. One was hurt and the other was humiliated. Unexpectedly they had a feeling of sympathy for each other. She is just a minor 8th-rank county officer, and she dares to humiliate me like this. That actress is also blind. When the appointment of the imperial court comes, Brother Xian will at least be a 7th-rank official, but she actually ignores Brother Xian. Cui Yinxing's tone was still indignant. After saying that, he did not forget to stab Jiang Zian in the back. A trace of gloominess appeared in Jiang Zian's eyes. He raised his head and drank up the wine in his cup but did not speak. That seems to be County Magistrate Liu? Cui Yinxing put down his wine cup, glanced around and saw a person not far away. After a moment of surprise he walked over there. Chapter 176. Cui Yinxing and Jiang Zian were both from Qing'an Prefecture, but they weren't students of Anxi County, so they didn't have much contact with County Magistrate Liu before. Of course, with their previous status they couldn't reach this level either. However, things were different now. According to the past practice of the imperial court, the new jinshi every year was more important, and the lowest rank would be appointed as a 7th-grade county magistrate, who had a brighter future than those who became officials through other channels. In this way they naturally had the qualifications to be on an equal footing with County Magistrate Liu. Seeing Cui Yinxing stand up and walk towards County Magistrate Liu, Jiang Zian's eyes flickered. After a little hesitation he also stood up. Let me propose a toast to County Magistrate Liu. Cui Yinxing walked up to County Magistrate Liu and said with a smile as he raised his glass. County Magistrate Liu smelled a strong smell of alcohol from a few steps away. County Magistrate Liu raised his head and frowned slightly. He had seen the conflict between Cui Yinxing and County Magistrate Li just now, so he naturally didn't like Cui Yinxing. However, one shouldn't hit a smiling person, so he symbolically raised his glass, took a sip and put it down. He was a little tipsy just now, but after seeing the scene by chance, he sobered up a little and didn't dare to drink anymore. Cui Yinxing drank all the wine in his glass, and when he lowered his head, he saw that County Magistrate Liu's glass was still full. A trace of displeasure appeared on his face, but it soon disappeared. At this moment, Jiang Zian walked over and also said, Junior Magistrate Liu, and bowed to County Magistrate Liu. Among the new jinshi in Qing'an Prefecture, Anxi County accounted for more than half of them. Lord Liu, you're really good at teaching. Cui Yinxing complimented County Magistrate Liu after sitting down in front of him. County Magistrate Liu sneered in his heart. Anxi County was the largest county in Qing'an Prefecture, and its students were far better than other counties in both quantity and quality. The prefectural school was full of talents, and every year's imperial examination was like this. Obviously this guy was up to no good. It's all thanks to the prefectural magistrate and Professor Feng. I don't dare to take credit, County Magistrate Liu said lightly. County Magistrate Liu's indifferent attitude made Cui Yinxing and Jiang Zian suspicious, wondering if they had offended him in some way. They racked their brains for a long time but still couldn't remember. Cui Yinxing was in a bad mood tonight. He just embarrassed a lowly actor, but he was slapped in the face by Li with a poem and became a laughingstock in the eyes of the public. Now he wanted to come over to get close to County Magistrate Liu. It would be best if he could make trouble for the county magistrate in the future. Unexpectedly, he was blocked by County Magistrate Liu's cold attitude before he said it. After becoming a new jinshi, his self-confidence swelled a little. The Cui family was also a rich and powerful family with a lot of people in the imperial court. His official career would be smooth sailing in the future, so he didn't pay attention to a small county magistrate at all. With the help of the wine, he said in a strange tone, I didn't know that such a powerful figure like County Magistrate Li had appeared in your county. Even the prince attached great importance to your poetic talent. County Magistrate Lu's subordinates are really full of talents. For County Magistrate Lu, this sentence was not a compliment but a sarcasm. If County Magistrate Lu heard Cui Yinxin's words a few days ago, he would definitely be very unhappy. After all, he was the County Magistrate of Anxi. No one would feel good if he was overshadowed by an assistant official. But after witnessing so many things with his own eyes, he had long given up these thoughts. The heir, the prince, the princess, the emperor. Which one of these people could be contacted by a small county magistrate like him? How could he dare to have a trace of dissatisfaction in his heart when he could talk and laugh with the emperor? Perhaps this was the opportunity for him, County Magistrate Lu, to make further progress in his life. In this case I have to congratulate County Magistrate Lu, Jiangxian said with a fake smile. As a county magistrate, he would definitely feel uncomfortable if his limelight was overshadowed by a county magistrate. Jiangxian simply added fuel to the fire. If County Magistrate Lu had a grudge against him, he would definitely have a hard time in the future. I don't need you two to worry about my affairs, County Magistrate Lu said coldly with a wave of his sleeve. How could he not hear the hidden meaning in their words? He was slightly angry. After all, the two of them had not been appointed officials yet, but they dared to mock him. If they weren't in the prince's mansion, he would have probably reprimanded them. I'm afraid that the person surnamed Li will become arrogant because of the favor. If that happens, County Magistrate Lu will probably have a headache, Cui Yinxin said with a faint smile as he looked at County Magistrate Lu. It was already somewhat presumptuous for a new jinxia to say such words to a county magistrate. However, Cui Yinxin had the backing of the Cui clan, so she naturally looked down on officials like County Magistrate Lu, who had no background and was born in a poor family. Secondly, she really drank a lot tonight. This place was remote and there was no one around, so she naturally spoke more casually. Hearing this, County Magistrate Lu couldn't help but stand up from his seat no matter how good-tempered he was. However, before he could reprimand them, another stern voice suddenly exploded behind them. Presumptuous. Cui Yinxin and Jiangxian suddenly turned around. When they saw a middle-aged man with a cold face standing behind them, cold sweat rolled down their foreheads. Their legs became weak and they almost collapsed to the ground. Prince, bastard, is this all you've learned after studying the books of sages for so many years? With the cold voice of Prince Ning, Cui Yinxin and Jiangxian's hearts sank to the bottom. Is that, Prince? In the distance, the officials who were talking also noticed the abnormality here. After looking at each other, they stood up and gathered here. The second night watch had passed and it was late at night. The banquet in the prince's mansion was finally over. The guests from Qing and prefecture all stood up and said goodbye. Carriages drove away from the gate of the prince's mansion. The curfew in the city was nothing to him. The patrolling soldiers had already received orders and wouldn't stop them. The prince's mansion would naturally arrange a place for the guests who came from further places to rest. When Cui Yinxin and Jiangxian walked out of the prince's mansion, they were still a little muddle-headed. Their minds were blank, and the only thought left in their minds was how to save their official careers that had turned from bright to gloomy. There were also other officials who walked out of the gate and looked at their backs, shaking their heads and sighing. The two had just talked nonsense in the prince's mansion and happened to be heard by Prince Ning. Then they were reprimanded mercilessly. For the new jinxia, the imperial court would first look at the evaluation of the local officials before officially appointing them. This was related to the official careers of the scholars in the prince's mansion. According to the usual practice, most people would praise them. But this time, Cui Yinxin and Jiangxian might have a stain on them that couldn't be erased. As the people that Ning Wang had heavily mentioned, if the two of them wanted to get a good job, it was almost a pipe dream. Of course, everyone remembered the county lieutenant Li, who was the source of all this, although he only showed up for a short time. Chapter 177. There were no walls in the world that didn't have a crack. The events that happened at Ning Wangfu's banquet last night spread throughout the scholars the next day. Of course, a large part of the reason why the news spread so quickly was because of the phrase, to write a new poem forcefully expressing sorrow, which made countless scholars feel like they were being shot in the knees. After some scholars heard this poem, they looked at the work they were proud of before. The words revealed all kinds of sorrow. Their faces turned red and they hid it well, not easily showing it to others again. Living in the prosperous Jiangnan area, the world was stable, the years were peaceful, and when they had nothing to do, they would recite poems and write some lyrics. This was the life of a scholar. However, if they didn't have enough experience, it was impossible to compose good poems. They read all day, held poetry meetings, and when they were in the mood, they would go to the brothels to experience the suffering of the common people. How could there be so much hatred between the country and the family? But in order to write a poem, they could only forcefully express sorrow. Moaning without illness, expressing sorrow without worry, this imperceptibly increased the pompous style of poetry in the literary circles of Jiangnan. However, even though everyone was well aware of this, they wouldn't point it out. After all, in order to write a poem, they couldn't personally go to the border to experience the situation at the border, and experience the pain of the destruction of their country. And this phrase, to write a new poem forcefully expressing sorrow, was like a fierce slap to their faces, reminding them to face reality. It was likely that in the future, when someone wrote this kind of poem again, they would have to weigh in their heart whether or not it was forcefully expressing sorrow. As the poem became more and more popular, it swept through the brothels and was heard by more and more people. As time went by, the pompous style of the entire poetry world actually decreased. Of course, this was a story for the future. At this time, the culprit that caused this matter was in his own courtyard, enjoying the warm wind, lying on a rocking chair leisurely. Li was very idle. He hadn't gone to the shop to take a look for a few days. Ruidu and spirits brought in a large amount of profit every day, most of which came from the share of the prince's mansion. Rui Workshop's business was better than before, but its share in the total income was decreasing. If he was alone, he would probably close the shop and wait for the money to come in. However, Rui Workshop was related to the livelihood of many people in the stockade. They were willing to do it, and Li was happy to be a hands-off shopkeeper. He had been waiting for Jinshan for the past few days. Counting the days, the emperor should have returned to the palace a long time ago. The reward he mentioned that night should still be valid, right? 100 mu of fertile land and 100 bolts of silk. Of course, the most important thing was the 10,000 taels of gold. How long would it take to spend it all? Li Yi's desire to earn money diminished as he thought about all the money that was flying toward him. Lying on the rocking chair, some parts of his body were still faintly aching. This was because he had been training excessively for the past 2 days. He couldn't afford to offend his fiery sister-in-law. He had only accidentally seen her washing her belly band in the courtyard 2 days ago. Did she have to take revenge on him like this? If he hadn't asked Rui to massage him a few times with her unique method, he would probably still be trembling when he walked. A burst of noise suddenly came from outside the door. The courtyard door wasn't closed. 2 pale, beardless men with cold and arrogant expressions pushed the door open and entered. Li looked up and saw 2 familiar eunuchs. He couldn't help but feel happy. The people who delivered money had come. The 2 of you must have had a hard time coming from afar. Would you like to come in and have a cup of tea first? This time, Li Yi's attitude toward the 2 was completely different from before. He was extremely enthusiastic. After all, this time they were here to deliver money. He couldn't go against anyone but gold. Li Yi's attitude also stunned the 2 eunuchs who delivered the imperial edict. They felt quite flattered. It had only been a few days, but the 2 eunuchs were not used to such a big change in attitude. But at least they got a smile this time. The 2's cold expressions softened a little, and their tone was much gentler than before. They said, "His Majesty has an imperial edict. County Lieutenant Li, accept it." Xuanhuan was taken down the mountain by her sister Rui to go shopping. There was only Li Yi at home. When the 2 eunuchs entered the village just now, they must have made a lot of noise again. Looking out of the door, many people looked inside curiously. What was wrong with the son-in-law of Rui's family? It had only been a few days. Why did an imperial edict come again? For generations they probably hadn't seen an imperial edict even once. Now they saw it twice in a few days. Although the imperial edict wasn't for them, they had something to brag about when they went out in the future. "I've knelt in front of an imperial edict. That thing is rare. Have you seen it before?" Therefore, before Li Yi knelt, a lot of people knelt outside the door first. Anxi County Lieutenant Li Yi created the method of cardiopulmonary resuscitation. A eunuch began to read the imperial edict expressionlessly. The imperial edict didn't mention anything about Li Yi's meritorious service in rescuing the emperor. After all, the emperor had snuck out this time, so he couldn't be too ostentatious. He used the reason that Li Yi had contributed the method of cardiopulmonary resuscitation. He said a lot of praises but didn't get to the main point. With 100 generations of meritorious service, you will be rewarded with 100 bolts of silk, 100 acres of fertile land and 10,000 gold. When the eunuch finished reading, Li Yi already couldn't wait to take the imperial edict. He said, "Thank you for your grace, your majesty." After going through a set of formal procedures, it was naturally the part that Li Yi was most looking forward to next. The bailiffs that came along moved the silk into the courtyard in piles. Li Yi had seen the land deed with his own eyes. However, when all the bailiffs returned to their original positions and stopped moving things into the house, Li Yi still hadn't seen the 10,000 gold that he had been looking forward to for a long time. "Where's the 10,000 gold?" Li Yi looked at one of the eunuchs and asked. "Did they forget about it?" The eunuch pointed at a rather luxurious box in the middle of the silk and said, "It's over there." When Li Yi looked at the box, he couldn't help but have a thought. "Are you King kidding me? How does this broken little box look like it can contain 10,000 gold taels?" He ran over to open the box and saw the copper coins lying inside. "This is the 10,000 gold?" Li Yi asked uncertainly. "This is the 10,000 gold. Not a penny less," the eunuch said with a nod. Li Yi was stunned for a while. When he raised his head again, he looked at the eunuch in a somewhat unfriendly way. "You two are a bit too unkind. These copper coins are worth at most 1 tael of gold. Where did you hide my gold? Let me tell you, I'm very familiar with your supervisor Chang." Li Yi was very angry. Even if they secretly kept dozens or hundreds of taels of gold for the 10,000 gold taels, he wouldn't care about it. After all, they came all the way here and he should pay them for their hard work. But these 10,000 gold taels were only left with a pile of copper coins when they were sent here. This was too black-hearted. Fang didn't care about such a little money now, did he? Hearing this, the two eunuchs faintly twitched the corners of their mouths. Did this county magistrately think that the 10,000 gold meant 10,000 gold taels? If so, they were afraid that the national treasury would be emptied after a few more rewards from His Majesty. Chapter 178. The two eunuchs could not stand the resentment in Li Yi's eyes. After announcing the rewards, they could not wait to leave the courtyard and gallop away on their horses. They did not receive any gifts as thanks this time, but they did not care about it anymore. They only hoped that they would not encounter such a difficult task in the future. In the beginning, Li Yi wanted to give the two eunuchs a small token of appreciation. After all, they had come all the way from the capital and were tired. It would not be too much of a heartache to give away 10 taels of gold. However, he did not expect that 10,000 taels of gold would become 1 tael of gold. If he gave more, he would have to pay for it. However, he did not know that the people who received rewards in the past only cared about the emperor's gift itself. They did not attach much importance to money. Since ancient times, he was probably the only one who had such an unconventional idea. The mountain of gold that he had been looking forward to for a long time had flown away. Li Yi was a little disappointed. It was true that those who did not study enough would suffer. Who knew that even the rewards here were so routine? 10,000 taels of gold was equivalent to 10,000 copper coins. It was extremely fake and empty. Why did they not just say 10,000 copper coins in the beginning? Forget it. Since the emperor thought that his life was only worth 1 tael of gold and a few mu of land, what else could he say? It seemed that he could not expect a free lunch from the sky. A happy life had to be built with his own hands. When Lu Rui and the other two girls arrived at the door, the crowd outside had not dispersed yet. Looking through the gate, one could see a pile of neatly arranged cloth. According to the official who had just read the imperial edict, His Majesty the Emperor had awarded 100 mu of good farmland to Rui's husband. It should be known that good farmland was not like the land in the stockade village. Every year it produced more grain. If the stockade village had so much good farmland, it would not have ended up in such a situation. Rui is back. Seeing Lu's sister Rui walking over, the crowd hurriedly made way for them. They looked at them with envy. The two lonely and helpless children in the past had now risen to the top, and no one could casually bully them. Rui is back. Go back quickly. Another official from the capital came to your house just now. They gave you a lot of good things this time. Everyone was talking at once and their expressions were one of envy and awe. It was said that the emperor's grace was vast, but why did it always fall on the head of young Master Rui? It had only been a few days, but His Majesty had rewarded him with an official position and a piece of land. Rui's husband had obtained the emperor's favor. In the future he would be a high-ranking official, and they might be able to benefit from it. Recalling how they had made things difficult for Sister Rui in the past, some of them were filled with regret. Back then, I was really blind. At first, when Lu Rui saw so many people at the door, she thought that something big had happened at home. She was a little anxious, but after hearing what they said, she was relieved. She said a few polite words to the crowd and hurried into the yard. Holding the things she bought at the foot of the mountain, Xuanhuan also hurriedly ran to the courtyard. She was careless and tripped over the threshold. Fortunately, Lu Rui caught her in time. Standing in the yard, Li Yi looked at the pile of copper coins. The more he looked at it, the angrier he became. If he kept it, he would always think of this infuriating thing. If he threw it away, he couldn't bear to. Husband, this is... When Lu Rui walked into the yard, the first thing she saw was the silk cloth. She walked to Li Yi's side, and her pretty face was full of confusion. She knew that Li Yi was rewarded with the title of county lieutenant, and it seemed that it was because of an article he wrote. But why was it this time? She originally thought that maybe she could live a peaceful life, but since a decision a few months ago, her whole life had changed dramatically and she couldn't adapt to it. I accidentally did something that benefited the people again. These are all rewards from His Majesty. Li Yi sighed and said, How can you say that you have benefited the people? Lu Rui smiled. She was already used to Li Yi's words. She asked doubtfully, Since it is a reward, why do you frown? That's too little? Li Yi's voice was heard. Lu Rui's pretty face froze. There was actually someone who thought that the reward from His Majesty was too little? If the current emperor knew what he was thinking, would he take back the reward he had been given? However, thinking of the last time when he was appointed as an official, it was not so strange for him to have such thoughts. Xuanhuan looked at the fine silk cloth in the courtyard and mumbled. If she knew there was so much cloth at home, she wouldn't have bought it in the city. After painstakingly carrying it up, she found that there was already a pile of fine silk cloth in the courtyard. There were so many bolts of cloth, enough to make a few hundred sets of clothes for the 3 women at home. Li didn't intend to put the things bestowed by the emperor at home, and he didn't have free space, so he asked Xuanhuan to send 1 bolt to each of his sisters. There were still a lot left, and he planned to sell them at the foot of the mountain when he had the chance. The silk cloth bestowed by the emperor should be sold at a higher price, right? Throughout the history of the Jing kingdom, the emperors were not narcissistic enough to force others to put up the things bestowed by them. It was not uncommon to give the emperor's rewards to others or sell them for money. Although the emperor would feel uncomfortable if he knew, it was not a crime. There was only half a month left before he took office. In recent days, Lu Rui's training of him was obviously stricter. In addition to some basic skills, Li Yi would spend about 2 hours every day to learn a set of saber skills. The position of county lieutenant was still a little dangerous. It was better to improve his combat effectiveness. In case of an accident, he still needed some ability to protect himself. Fortunately, although the growth of true chi was slow, the speed at which he learned the moves was still very scary. With only a saber manual, Li Yi could imitate it after reading it once. Of course, it was just the appearance. In the eyes of Lu Rui, they were full of loopholes. Every time he saw it, he would mercilessly point it out for him. Mistakes should be corrected. In terms of martial arts, Rui could not tolerate any sand in his eyes. Before, Li Yi still laughed at Imperial Physician Lu. This time he finally understood his previous mood. Regardless of whether she was really strict or using her position to avenge a personal grudge, at the very least, she was still very responsible when it came to teaching him martial arts. Li Yi did not pursue the matter from before. He only asked her a question about which came first, the chicken or the egg. Then he slowly strolled out of the courtyard. Young master, you are here? Passing through half of the village, he walked into a relatively dilapidated courtyard. A white-haired old man was sitting in the courtyard, holding a carpenter's tools in his hand, and he was busy doing something. Hearing the sound, he turned around and saw Li Yi. The old man immediately put down the tools in his hand, stood up and said with a smile, Uncle Han, how is the thing I asked you to make last time? Li Yi put down the bag of rice and noodles in his hand and asked with a smile. Uncle Han was the carpenter who helped him make the rocking chair. In fact, with his age, he was far from being an old man in the future. But in this era, the average life expectancy of people was not long. After the age of 30, people could touch their beards and call themselves old man. Perhaps because he had suffered a lot in his life, Uncle Han was in his early 50s, but his hair was already gray and he looked a lot older. It has been ready for a long time. I was just waiting for you to pick it up. Uncle Han smiled and said kindly. Chapter 179. With Uncle Han's decades of carpentry skills, there were only a few details that needed to be improved on. Li Yi put down the rice and noodles, pointed out the few improvements, and walked out of the courtyard not long after. He wanted to leave some money as a reward, but Uncle Han insisted on not accepting it, so he could only give up. When he returned home, Lu Rui was still thinking about the question he left behind before he left. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Actually, Li Yi did not know the answer to this question. Even in the 21st century, this was a question that the scientific community debated endlessly. There were all kinds of theories circulating on the internet, but at least before Li Yi left, there was no conclusion as to whether it was correct or not. If one pondered over this question for a long time, it might become a question of philosophers and extend to the question of the origin of mankind or the universe. I don't know. Li Yi answered honestly. You don't know. Lu Rui clenched her teeth tightly. She actually did not know the answer to this question that she had racked her brains for. It seemed that there was a need to spar with him during the practice tomorrow to see how well he had mastered those moves. Seeing that she was on the verge of going berserk, the resentment that had accumulated over the past few days finally dissipated a little. However, when her expression returned to normal the next moment, Li Yi had an inexplicable feeling that something was wrong. Oh yeah, do you have any convenient hidden weapons? He shook his head to the back of his head and asked her. Although he had been practicing his saber skills for the past few days, the few moves that he had learned could only be used to deal with ordinary people. If he encountered someone who knew a little bit of martial arts, it would not make a difference whether he had a weapon or not. Practicing martial arts was not something that could be done overnight. In order to increase his sense of security, he needed to find another way. No, Lu Rui said without thinking. Among all kinds of weapons, hidden weapons had always been looked down upon by the righteous people as an unorthodox method. In the martial world, those who had a little bit of fame would not use hidden weapons. Then she added, even if you do, you won't be able to use it with your current skills. Li Yi knew that she was telling the truth. After all, one must have enough strength to throw a dart to hurt someone. Although he was slightly stronger than an ordinary person under Rui's hellish training, he was still far from that level. He rolled his eyes at Lu Rui and said, that's why I'm asking if you have any convenient hidden weapons that can be used by ordinary people. For example, have you heard of pear blossom storm needles? When they are used, blood will be drawn. If there's poison on them, even a normal person can kill a martial artist. Never heard of it. Lu Rui shook his head and said, there are a few sects in Jianghu that specialize in using concealed weapons, and they may have the concealed weapons you mentioned. As for coating the concealed weapons with poison, this is a taboo in Jianghu. Once the matter is exposed, you will be hunted by the entire Jianghu. On the path of martial arts, practicing diligently is the right path. Don't think about taking the crooked path all day long. In Jianghu there were both good and evil sections. But no matter who was good or evil, they all despised this kind of despicable behavior of secretly hurting people. A martial artist with excellent martial arts was killed by an ordinary person with a poisonous concealed weapon. It was too unjust, and there was no dignity of a martial artist at all. Therefore, for this kind of thing, the two sects that had always been at odds with each other actually reached an agreement to resist it together. In Jianghu, martial artists who were famous for their concealed weapons were rare. Originally, he just wanted to ask her about concealed weapons. It would be best if he could get a suitable concealed weapon. In the end, not only did he not achieve his goal, but he was also taught a lesson by her for no reason. There was still half a month before he took office. Since he had nothing to do, Li Yi decided to take a look at his land. 10,000 gold was 10,000 copper coins, but there was no such trick on the land. He said it was 100 acres of fertile land, and it was really 100 acres. He didn't know if the low-ranking official who divided the land did it on purpose, but the land that was divided for Li Yi happened to be in the Li family village. But thinking about it, a low-ranking official shouldn't have this power, and the person who finally agreed on this matter should be County Magistrate Lu. As a matter of fact, since the day Li Yi escaped from the village, he hadn't been here again. Led by a low-ranking official, when he walked to the Li family village, a group of people stood neatly at the entrance of the village. As early as a few days ago, the Yamen had sent someone to inform them that His Majesty had given the land here to the county magistrate, which meant that in the future, they would no longer pay rent to the government, but would give it to the county magistrate. In the distance they saw a person in the uniform of a bailiff leading a few people over. A white-haired old man was about to go forward, but when he saw the young man walking in the middle, a trace of joy appeared on his old face. He quickly walked up, grabbed Li Yi's arm and said, "Hey boy, you're finally back. Where have you been these months? The government has come to look for you several times. Last time, 2 eunuchs wanted to deliver the imperial edict to the Li family village, but they were stopped by Emingzu. Later they learned that Li Yi lived in the Willow Leaf village, so they didn't come here. Therefore, the people of the Li family village didn't know that the county magistrate was the boy from the Li family who they had watched grow up. How can you talk to the county magistrate like that? Seeing that the head of the Li family village was so rude to the county magistrate, the low-ranking official reprimanded him with a cold face. What? County magistrate? The old man was stunned and looked up at Li Yi with his eyes full of doubt. County magistrate? The villagers of the Li family village who were about to come over to greet Li Yi also stopped and looked at him with surprise and doubt. Since when did Li Xiaozai become the county magistrate? This is the new county magistrate of this county. He was appointed by His Majesty. Don't be rude, the low-ranking official looked around and said. It was said that county magistrate Li grew up in Li's village, so he must have a lot of elders here. However, things were different now. County Magistrate Li was deeply favored by the emperor. Even County Magistrate Lu specially told him to be as respectful to County Magistrate Li as he was to County Magistrate Lu. If these people still put on airs of elders in front of County Magistrate Li, it would be a little too disrespectful. After the low-ranking official spoke again, the old man realized that the young man in front of him who he had watched grow up was no longer the junior of the Li family who only knew how to read books. I'm the head of the Li family village. Greetings, County Magistrate. He hurriedly let go of his hand and bowed respectfully. Seeing the first person he met after coming to this world again, Li Yi had an indescribable feeling in his heart. What happened a few months ago seemed like it happened yesterday. If the old man hadn't asked people to arrest him, Li Yi wouldn't have escaped, and naturally, there would be no subsequent events. He wouldn't have met Rui, Xuanhuan, Fang, and of course he wouldn't have met Li Xian and Emingzu. He might still be a county magistrate in the Li family village who didn't know the next meal. Sometimes things like fate were so magical. The moment his life really began in this world was probably the moment when the old man shouted that he was going to be arrested. Thinking of the old man's face full of concern when he came over just now, Li Yi smiled and went forward to help him up, saying, "Old man, please get up. I was ill a few days ago and forgot everything. May I know your name?" Not expecting that County Magistrate Li would help him up in person, the old man was a little flattered. Seeing that County Magistrate Li was kind and more quick-witted than before, he felt relieved and said, "County Magistrate Li used to call me Uncle Li," but he was puzzled in his heart. Why had he never heard that madness could make people lose their memories?